Mayor, we are back up.
Thank you very much, City Manager. Uh, we'll go ahead and continue again. Director Loh, if you want to continue where you left off.
Sure. Next slide shows the cumulative change in sales use tax collected from 2018 to 2022. The total amount is 7.2 million. Then we're going to review the city's sales tax area map. This one shows the total tax collected by area and the new business opened and closed. This slide shows year-to-date sales use tax collection by area. Also, you can see below we show the total refunds. At the end of 2022, we have a refund 43,000 compared to 97,000 the same time last year. Regarding the expenditures, year-to-date expenditures are 14 million or 25.4% of fiscal year. The total expenditure year to date are 646,000 or 4.8% higher than the same time last year. The majority of the variances compared to the same time last year are due to 3.5% salary increases for across the board. Also, if you take a look at information technology, the numbers are higher in 2022 due to the timing of 200,000 software licenses. And public works line item show a higher spending in 2022 due to additional SERF spending on vehicles. SERF stands for Capital Equipment Replacement Fund. So we are comparing the expenditures by departments. The next one, we're showing the expenditures by categories. We broke down our expenditures into 5 categories by personnel, commodities, contractual service, capital debt service. The contractual services include 200,000 payment for software licenses and 880,000 for janitorial services costs, which are offset by personnel costs and a plan review cost of 75,000. Commodities include items such as fuels, chemicals, building supplies, office supplies. And a contractual service expenditure include the professional service agreements such as fire emergency services, software maintenance agreements, property workers' compensation insurance costs. This concludes my presentation. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Director Loh. Are there any questions from council? Mayor Pro Tem.
I just want to make sure that I understand the operating deficit that we're working with right now, this $22,000, which in the grand scope of our overall budget is not a gigantic amount of money, but if it continues to creep forward that way, it might be cause for concern. The next slide following that operating deficit slide, though, shows that we have transferred $150,000 to the EDDA for a loan. Is that part of this operating deficit?
No, that's not. That's already reflected in the fund balance.
Okay, so when I look at the general fund transfers, we transferred into the general fund 134,000, and we transferred out 182. So that difference is more than $22,000. But if it's not included in the final figure, then I don't completely understand how we are operating at a deficit when we budgeted a balanced budget.
Yeah, you can see this. We have amended operating deficit $112,000 after the budget supplemental number 1, but originally we presented a balanced budget. But after budget supplemental number 1, now we have budgeted operating deficit of $112,000.
Okay, and that included a number of contributions for capital. So this operating deficit is inclusive of the capital obligations that we made when we did the
No, we transfer the money from unassigned fund balance to fund the capital projects. Or if that's not a general fund related, we have different funds. We transfer the unappropriate fund balance to fund other enterprise funds capital projects.
Okay, I think I'm gonna probably have to look into that a little further to completely grasp it. My concern, if it hasn't been fully captured here, is that that 22,000 figure continues to grow over the course of the year, and we have expenses that exceed our revenues.
Yes, you remember we did a presentation 2 weeks ago. We give council estimate revenue expenditures, how we will end 2022. We'll expect additional tax use, sales use taxes, but we are also expecting some additional expenditures due to inflation pressure. So you can, if you remember, we have very, very small operating surplus that would decrease our unassigned fund balance significantly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Russell.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Loh, for the presentation. So my question is on the interest income. I know that it's unrealized losses. Are we actually losing principal? Or is it just we are not experiencing as much interest as we got last year? Is that where the negative number comes from?
Our investment policy stipulates that we invest the majority of our funds in fixed income, basically bond. You know, if the interest rates increase, the bond value decrease. That's why we have an unrealized loss. If you go to our investment performance summary online, we currently have February information online. After tonight's presentation, we will post the March financial information, including investment performance. So if you take a look at page 5, which shows the fair market value activity summary, at the end of year to date, at the end of March, our rate of return is negative 95 compared to the 5-year U.S. Treasury benchmarks at negative 1.99. So given compared to our budgets, we have unrealized the loss, but compared to the market, we're still better.
So what if inflation continues? Then what happens?
Yeah, we thought about this, but if we really move the money now, all the unrealized loss would become realized loss. So they'd rather to put the money, continue put the money in the same place, so we don't incur realized loss.
Okay.
So it may take us years to recover from this interest spike. Yeah.
And at this point, it's not problematic, but it could be at some point.
Yeah. What we could do, that's one thing we are thinking to reevaluate our investment policy. Our investment policy is extremely conservative. But on the other hand, it's because the state's investment policy is extremely conservative. So we cannot be even more aggressive than the state policy. So what we could do is to revisit our investment policy and talk to our investment manager to see if this is a good time really to move money, or this is a good time for us to reevaluate our investment philosophy.
Right. And I'm not suggesting that we change right now, but I think we need to consider some things.
Some backup plan.
Right.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Noonekamp.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is about the reserve policy. I know that we discussed some changes to that recently, and I'm curious, what is the timeline for seeing the proposed change that Council has discussed in this kind of presentation? Will that be a 2023 budget change, or will we see that before then?
I would say we're going to present the final budget to Council on August the 8th. But we still have an administrative study. That's a study to allocate of all the services provided by different departments to enterprise funds and component units. Component units means E for EDDA. So that would change our budget. So we could revisit the reserve policy before we finalize the 2023 budget. We can make a note. Are you thinking to have a separate, do we need to approve this by ordinance or reserve policy? If we want to change reserve policy, do we need an ordinance or resolution?
It's not currently established by ordinance or the charter, so I think resolution would be sufficient.
Resolution.
Mhm.
Okay, so we can schedule time to finalize the reserve policy before we approve the 2023 budget.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I'll just ask the. Oh, go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
Sorry, I just wanted to seek a little more clarification on Councilmember Russell's question about the bond portfolio. It's not our policy to sell bonds at a loss on a regular basis, is it? When we purchase a bond contract, we hold it either for the duration of the contract, which guarantees our investment returned plus some interest on the bond. If we don't hold it for the duration of the contract, then we would sell it generally at a profit. But if interest rates tank, wouldn't we just be holding those bonds till maturity instead of getting rid of them?
If the interest rate decrease, the bond value will increase, then we'll have unrealized gain. But the Fed has made an announcement they are going to increase the interest rate additional 6 times by the end of the year. So we probably will see this unrealized loss for the rest of this year if the interest rates continue to increase.
Right, but we wouldn't sell them, so we wouldn't realize the loss. Because at maturity, the end of the contract, we have a demand for our principal and whatever interest the bond contract called for, correct?
Correct.
And we wouldn't purchase bonds that had a negative yield, I would think. So we wouldn't say, oh, we'll give you $100,000 and you pay us back 98 after a year. That would be silly. So we're not going to realize these losses if we maintain our portfolio the way it is now.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Oh,
Thank you.
yes. That's why we are still,
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Russell.
So along that lines, what happens to the bonds at maturity if it doesn't recover? Then at maturity, we may have a realized loss anyway.
that's a very good question. We can look into, see the maturity date, see how far away the maturity days. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Just a question regarding the commodities expenditures, and I'll get to you, Member Woodward. That did increase. Did we foresee some of the cost increases? Or I guess the question is that we were budgeting a lot less than last year, about 10% less. Just kind of curious in terms of what that commodities expenditure is, and if we foresaw that when we were building the budget last year.
So are you asking a little bit more detailed drill down to see what the line item consists of? Then
It's
we can
basically a
compare.
17% increase from where we were last year to date last year. So I'm just kind of curious. Obviously,
is-
it's fuel. I'm guessing that those are some of the cost increases that we're seeing nationwide. Just kind of curious. It's more of a comment in terms of just looking at that over the course of the year and saying we have to take that into account later on.
Yes.
Member Woodward.
My question is, on the bonds that we have, I mean, they're all spread out over different times, and do we take for the yield on that, for the monthly return on the interest, does that go back into buying more of those bonds, or do we take that as cash payment to the city? Or how are we paid?
Reinvest all the
It's reinvested.
into.
So as interest rates go up, the bond goes down, but the bond yield goes up. So I think the yield goes up, which is increasing the bond value. So it's bonds are a little
Wash.
different than, equity assets that you typically think of. So.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Anything else? Any other questions from council? Director Loh, thank you very much for tonight's monthly update. Moving on to agenda item 5, it's the neighborhood map project. So up tonight is neighborhood resources coordinator Madeline Hinkfuss and Historic Preservation Commissioner Matthew Crabtree to discuss the Inglewood neighborhood map. Good evening, Mr. Crabtree and Ms. Hinkfuss.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. All right, good evening. Can you hear me okay? All right. This is the culmination of many years of work here. The HPC committee started the neighborhood mapping project back in 2017, late 2017. The Inglewood neighborhood map combines historical subdivision names and modern day places of significance. The map referenced numerous historic maps and other resources, presented a draft of the Inglewood neighborhood map to City Council in September of 2021. I'll let you.
Okay, so in order to gain feedback on the neighborhood map, the city launched a community engagement campaign in late October. Part of that campaign was a survey, and that did close in late December of 2021. A list of engagement tools that were used. We launched a big social media campaign. We hosted a page on Inglewood Engaged. We did a handful of videos that gave tours of each neighborhood. We had an article in the Citizen magazine, and we also hosted an open house. We had a great community response. We had 248 individuals that submitted the survey. We had 30 plus community members attend the open house, and our Inglewood Engage project page had over 1,000 views.
All right. The Historic Preservation Commission's role in this, we met multiple times from January 2022 through April 2022 to review and discuss the survey data. HPC made changes to the neighborhood map based upon the feedback from the survey and historical information. Just kind of add in a quick point here that this was obviously a very important topic for the community because we received a lot of feedback, and we did our best, I think, to listen to and apply and kind of summarize down all the input that we received.
I'm just going to give a brief overview of the survey responses. So the map that you will see on the slide is the map draft that went out to the community. And one of the questions on the survey was, do you support the neighborhood boundaries drawn on the map? 149 individuals said yes, 88 said no, and 11 left that question blank. So HPC made changes to address the concerns of the 88 individuals that answered no. And after reviewing the data, we did identify 3 themes that we saw relevant or that over and over from the survey data. The first was neighborhood sizes. Some individuals thought that the neighborhoods were too big and others were too small. Neighborhood names was the second. Some individuals really liked the neighborhood names that were chosen, and there are other controversial ones. And then the third theme was neighborhood boundaries, just some suggested adjustments to those.
All right, so the neighborhood map changes. There were a number of neighborhoods for draft 2, which, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that was the one that was released to the community for the survey. 36 neighborhoods. Draft 3 increased that number to 40 neighborhoods. The changes made from draft 2 to 3. Neighborhood boundary changes, 19. Neighborhood name changes, 10. And additional neighborhoods, 4. And this is an example of the changes here that were adjusted and made. To kind of call out a couple things, the area around Swedish Hospital, Swedish Craig, we received a lot of input on that one, and decided to go back to some more traditional names there and ones that aligned with some of the DDA work. We changed slight adjustments here and there, incorporated a few neighborhoods, but probably the biggest one actually was Forest Hills. It's amazing. And throughout this whole process, it's neat to see what the community comes back with, because honestly, I don't think we had any idea that there was actually an established neighborhood there that most of the city probably didn't even know about. It was a group of folks that identified themselves as Forest Hill, and they were very vocal about getting that name on the map. And we're excited that this sort of thing came about, and we learned something new there and incorporated their neighborhood name along with a number of other areas. Bellevue Park was another big change that occurred. That's a very big park in the city. A lot of people associate with, instead of it just being around the park, a lot of people associated the neighborhood around that also. Jason Park was a big one. Jackson Heights, that was one that a lot of people really were interested in and maintaining. Yeah, so I guess I'll hand it over to you here. So, neighborhood map adoption. Implementing a city-wide neighborhood map will help Englewood residents identify where they live, strengthen our community, and preserve the city's diverse population. During my last presentation to council, which some of you weren't present for, what's kind of an interesting aspect with this, currently the city is divided into districts, and those districts closely align with council districts, and some people associate with the council district they live in, but that's a very large area. Some people associate with just the direction in the city that they live in, whatever corner. This will give the opportunity for people to associate with a smaller group and a tighter, denser neighborhood area.
Okay, so the next steps. So we're asking council to formalize and adopt the official Englewood neighborhood map. And once that happens, Communications will launch a marketing campaign to encourage residents to identify which neighborhood they live in, educate the community on the history of each neighborhood, and identify neighborhoods to install neighborhood signage. And then the Neighborhood Resources Program will assist in the organization of neighborhood groups and connect residents.
Real quickly here, if I have just another second, it's important to differentiate here too, because a lot of the input we did receive is that people would look at their title or would look at the deed to their home and they say, well, according to this, I live in the subdivision of Jackson Broadway Heights, or I live in this area or that area. This doesn't change the subdivisions. The subdivisions have existed since they were created, many of them back before the city even existed. Originally we had given this very large piece of paper here out to council. And actually, if we wanted to bring it up real fast, I'd like to show what all the subdivisions are in the city, because I think it's kind of an interesting historical point. But there are over 300 subdivisions in 6.5 square miles here in Englewood. When we started this project, the intent was, hey, why don't we just name our neighborhoods after the original subdivisions? Well, 300 neighborhoods in Englewood would be probably a little bit too much, especially considering some of these subdivisions include 1 or 2 houses. So there was a lot of work that had to be done over the course of the last few years, well, since 2017 when we started. And a lot of members on the commission had an opportunity to look into this. We had Mike Jones that was helping with this. We had CJ Cullinan. We had Helene Federici, myself. And it was a lot of work. And when Sean came in as city manager, he was really excited that we were working on this, and we were able to team up closer with the city and create. I'm pretty happy with what I think we've created, and I hope everybody else does too. So I think let me zoom in here real fast. So this is from Arapahoe County. If I can, where's the zoom down there? Right there. So we're gonna go for 120. Wow. Okay, too close. So let me see if it's going to let me scroll. It's a very large file, so it's going to take a second. It's a little blurry. Hopefully take a second. There it is. So I'm going to just slowly, without making everybody seasick here, I'm going to slowly kind of pan across. And you can see here how many different little subdivisions there are in the city. And it's a lot of great history, and it's a lot of great information to have. it definitely put a level of challenge on picking which name. Thankfully, we got a lot of input from the community throughout this process, and hopefully, it's adopted and supported in the community here. But we're really kind of excited that we got done what we got done. So I don't know if you have anything else, Madeline.
No, we're ready for questions.
Okay.
Mr. Crabtree, Ms. Hinkfuss, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you very much to the Historic Preservation Commission for all the work that they did in this and getting us to this point. So I will open it up to questions from council. Mayor Pro Tem.
2 questions. The first is in regards to the area where I live, which has been designated as Leland Heights.
Yes.
If you look at that block,
Mhm.
Clayton Elementary School is right basically in the middle or at the top center-ish of that block.
Okay.
We have a neighborhood called Cherry Lynn. We have a neighborhood called Bellevue Park. We have a neighborhood called Jason Park. Why did we call this Leland Heights instead of Clayton?
Well, so this was a tough area. You asked a similar question when last time I was here. Leland Heights does have original subdivision in that area, in that approximate area, and that was the definition there. Cherry Lynn is not named after the school, but actually named after the original stop that the Cherry Lynn would go up Broadway. So that was right at the corner between the point between Cherry Lynn and South Broadway Heights. There at the corner on Broadway was where the Cherry Lynn would stop, and a lot of that area still kind of considers themselves Cherry Lynn. So not necessarily was that named after a school, but to your point with Leland Heights, that was a subdivision that seemed to have interest in that particular area. We didn't really name anything around the schools that much. We did receive 1 point that came back from the survey, I believe, that asked if we were going to do that, but which school do you choose type thing. Whereas a lot of like where Englewood High School is and some of the other schools in the area, you'd have to kind of pick and choose. So we didn't focus on that as a main point, but what were your thoughts on that exactly?
My suggestion would be to make a change, frankly. Noting that Cherry Lynn neighborhood does appear to enclose Cherry Lynn Elementary School, whether that's the impetus for the name or not, I would suggest that it would be more fitting for our 2 areas south of Hampden that have schools in them to be named after those schools or to share names with the schools. That would be my suggestion. If I can get the support of council, that's the direction I'd like to see it move.
Well, Councilmember Ward, that's very good feedback, and I appreciate that.
My second question, and we did talk about this previously as well, but I wanted to bring this up. Cinderella City.
Mhm.
I know that there's historic significance to the name Cinderella City, but this area is preparing for a redevelopment in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
And I personally, whether you keep Cinderella or you keep City, I think City Center is more fitting and it contains the word city. So I would make that change as well. Just throwing that out for the rest. I know we had a conversation about that, the historical value of Cinderella City and such, and I'll let you weigh in on that instead of putting words in my mouth. But
No, that's fine. And some people did mention that. They said that was the history that was long forgotten, and we need not to remember that. Other people really supported it from the survey. That was Cinderella City was a unique time frame in Inglewood's past. Now there's even more things dating back to that area. Even prior to Cinderella City, this was once a city park. There was once airplanes manufactured, and just a little ways from here. Still as part of this land. This was a film set basically for a long time. So there's a lot of history in this area, and calling it Alexander Industries or Alexander, neighborhood, or there was a number of options that were selected in there, and that was a difficult one. That really was. But Inglewood has a very rich history, and a lot of it actually culminates around this particular area. And a lot of people do, I think, recognize Cinderella City as kind of a that point in time where people kind of can classify. Everybody remembers Cinderella City. In fact, the Historic Society has a talk tomorrow night on Cinderella City, and we've already had almost 200 people sign up for that. So it kind of shows the interest of Cinderella City with this. So that's the reason why that was chosen. You know, if you look to the hospital district, where it's a wellness district there, that kind of goes in line with a lot of the new momentum that's happening in that area. So we chose to select that there, and kept Cinderella City as kind of a history of the neighborhood. I think it can both look in the past and look to the future at the same time.
I appreciate that. And I understand where you're coming from. Just to put it out there, I feel like the people who would move into housing that we're preparing to potentially put in this area would identify more with City Center as their neighborhood than they would with Cinderella City. It just seems to have more, as a newer resident to Inglewood, I don't know, more of a neighborhood identity as for what's currently occurring. So I understand your perspective, though, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your input on it.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for your comments. And the question I wanted to ask Chair Crabtree, I believe would get at the genesis of some of your comments and thoughts. I was quite stunned at the level of kind of triangulation and qualitative research and work that was done. It seems maybe simple and easy, but it really wasn't. And a lot of what you're asking brought up a lot new information, a lot of understanding of the depth of history that's largely unknown. Thankfully, your representation on the Historic Preservation Society helped with your being chair of this group, bringing that sort of institutional and citywide knowledge. But it was so thick, and I wonder if you mind, without really delaying the meeting that much longer, Chair Crabtree, to sort of share a little snippet of the methodology you went through, because it was very painstaking, very long-standing, and it didn't just come from you. You were really cross-validating and getting feedback from enough sort of competing sources that made the decision very difficult to derive these names, to arrive at these. And I wouldn't have wanted to make those. I wonder if you mind speaking a little bit more to that process you went through,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and I'll give you the kind of the background on this. When the Historic Preservation Commission was first founded, I'm going to take a minute. When the Historic Preservation Commission was first formed, one of our first meetings, we talked about what are some of the great things that we can do and recognize the history in the city. And you look to other cities that have named areas and created the neighborhoods, and there wasn't any reason that Inglewood couldn't do that too. I mean, we've got a tremendous amount of history here in the city, and that was kind of during one of the very first meetings we said, well, why don't we look at some of the historic subdivisions and see if we can model the neighborhoods after that, maybe recognize even the original boundaries of the subdivisions. And that started the process. And Mike Jones and CJ Cullinan both worked on that part of the project and began collecting information. We received a lot of support from the Arapahoe County to get this map, helping us with a lot of the original subdivisions, went through and looked at each, a lot of the different areas here. And interesting to note, Logandale, that's an area that was once almost a separate city, I guess, before the foundation of Inglewood. So it was simply a matter of getting at least a draft together and getting the process and looking at. I mean, Cherolyn is an interesting one, because if you look at the original Arapahoe County map, it's South Broadway Heights was a very large subdivision at the time, and that goes the full stretch all the way down to Duncan Park. Cherolyn is an important part of our history, so that was included in there. The Broadway Stairs Heights, that's an area that I live in. I'm happy that got recognized as an individual neighborhood, but a lot of the stuff, further up on the map here, further north, those areas were originally plotted back in the 1800s, late 1800s. So a lot of these subdivision maps date back to 1880, 1890. So we tried to incorporate as best as we could with that. Hawthorne has a lot of history in the city with Hawthorne Elementaries at one point. So to your point, Mayor Pro Tem Ward, that actually Hawthorne Elementary doesn't exist anymore, but that has some history here in the city. Arapahoe Acres, of course, that doesn't need much of an introduction. That is a very important. And I think one of the jokes that came up there is that we probably shouldn't adjust the boundaries of Arapahoe Acres with the neighborhood. We might get a little bit of feedback on that. Bates Logan, that's a park. We tried to keep the park names as minimal as possible and try to recognize and focus on either important things that happened in the area or like Whitaker down here towards the south. Part of Bellevue Park was once Whitaker, owned by a gentleman named Whitaker. It was Whitaker Farms. And so while technically speaking, there's a lot of different subdivision options in that area, that was historically significant enough and an interesting enough name that we chose to call it that over the other subdivisions. So it was a give and take. And I think I mentioned this during the last presentation that this had to be adopted by the community, which meant that there couldn't be just one person saying, this shall be this way. We had to get the input, from the commission, from the Historic Society, from the community. The open house was amazing that we did here down in the library. We had a gigantic map that probably, 6 feet tall or so, and people could walk up and stick little Post-it notes in the areas that they identify with and recommend names. Around Forest Hills, there was about 24 Post-it notes. But we tried to recognize the history as best as possible. General Iron Works, there is a different subdivision that was on the map here originally, but it was important to recognize that history, I think, and make sure that was remembered. And I think as time goes by, and however this is advertised in the city or however it is adopted, at least this will be maybe a little bit of a remembrance of certain things in certain areas.
Thank you, Chair Crabtree.
Yeah.
There was really a lot of give and take, and I loved seeing sort of the evolution of the process also. And City Manager Lewis started here, and we had those conversations about Madeline Hinkfuss' position. And Madeline's done a tremendous amount for safe, fun, active, and engaged community. And then to see all of her work, because she began developing these boundaries and reaching out to constituents and engaging citizens in this in the first place. And so to see that come together with our historic groups, and then you engaged the citizens so well. It was interesting what citizens that lived in the areas or didn't live in those respective areas had to say, right, about what they knew about or what they valued about that area or why the boundary cannot be on this street. Well, I was really shocked by and just enlightened by everything the citizens shared. Yeah. So I love the way that you honored the citizen feedback in deriving what you have here and just the whole process. I think it may seem small, but I think this is huge for the community growth and development. So thank you.
Yeah, with Madeline's help and Chris's help, I mean, it was amazing. I don't think this would have gone off nearly as easily. A lot of hard work and help. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Wink. Member Woodward.
Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate all the work that you've done on this and the updates. I have a few questions on some of them.
Sure.
What is Belle Isle?
So, Belle Isle, we don't have a whole lot of history with that, but there is a subdivision so that deserves more, I think, more research in the future with this. But what comes down is that it was originally a subdivision in that area. There's a lot of industrial in both Belle Isle and the Platte River South. Those were originally kind of identified as industrial areas, and even on the neighborhood map, and that was actually, almost common sense feedback that we received from the community is like, don't call a neighborhood industrial; it's got a negative connotation. And we're like, It's a good point. That is very true. We probably don't want to do that. Down south there, that was copied over from Arapahoe County with there's a large chunk of that area that is the Belle Isle subdivision, and it fit the need, and we put it in there as a recommendation to replace the industrial moniker.
Okay, interesting. Also, I noticed Duncan Park,
Mhm.
and I mean, Duncan Park is a fairly new park, relatively speaking. It was originally a school there, and the city started renting the actual park from the school district when the school closed down and Swedish Hospital had expanded into the school. And then we finally bought it back in, I think it was 2006, from the school district. But I find that interesting. Historically, it's probably one of the newer names historically. And it's certainly as new as Cinderella City for that area. And in just mentioning Cinderella City, I think, with some of the plans and from what I've seen of the streets, names there, I mean, they're saying Cinderella, things like that directly relate to Cinderella City. And if that happens, that's absolutely the right name.
Oh, that's a good point. That's actually a really neat point. I didn't know that the DDA was looking at that. That's cool.
Well, that's a plan we've seen.
That's cool.
With
That's really neat.
names of some of the mall areas in there. Mansfield Heights is where I live. My legal description is Hampton Heights, South Broadway Heights rather. But Mansfield is kind of the avenue there because it's the high school in Hosanna to the north, and then single-family residences to the south, between Logan and Clarkson. And I think that's perfect. So, I just really appreciate the changes that have happened. I saw the original maps and stuff at Malley Center, and I know a number of us would kind of be in front of the map looking at it, pointing to where we live, and kind of going through some historical memories. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Noonekamp.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for all of your time on this project. One of my favorite things about Inglewood is normally when you meet someone new, within the first 5 minutes, they say, well, what part of the city do you live in? What are your cross streets? And I look forward to the day when I can say Romans Park, or, and that's such a great thing that we have. And that being said, as much as I'm excited about this project, it will not make everyone happy, right?
That's
A few
right.
things we do here do make everyone happy. And I'm curious, can you share a little more, Ms. Hinkfuss, on how these neighborhood names will and will not be used in the communications you're speaking about? There's some signage that you're speaking about. Can you kind of go into that a little bit more? And if someone in a neighborhood maybe doesn't prefer this name, how might this be used around them?
Yes. So as for the Neighborhood Resources Program, the goal is to start organizing some of these neighborhoods. So there's two ways that neighborhoods can do that. You can sign up and say, I would like to register my whole neighborhood, Logandale, and then give all of the cross streets. Or you can organize just a smaller group within that and just call it the name that they would like to call it. And then that just with different cross streets, and it's more of a neighborhood group. As for the signage, we are going to create some type of registration process or sign up process for neighborhoods that would like to sign up to get a neighborhood sign. And we would definitely need buy-in from that neighborhood before installing any signs. And so there would be a lot of outreach and communication going out to that neighborhood.
That's very helpful. So even if this map is approved as is, there are still more opportunities for citizens to weigh in before maybe they would see a sign in their neighborhood, or if they didn't like one of the names, they could create their own subgroup of a different name, is what
That
you're
is
saying.
correct,
Okay,
yes.
very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Noonan Camp. Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you very much for the project. I like how this ended up. I mean, everybody, of course, notices where they live. Um, our subdivision is named after the bigger half. I mean, we're on the very northeast corner, and we actually live in Hampton Heights Baptist Church subdivision, but Hampton Hills is, bigger, and I'm okay. I think that's great. I love what you've done with all of this. I love especially that the Centennial Acres piece, because we owned our first house in Centennial Acres. It was called Centennial Acres then. And the fact that it goes all the way over to that southwest corner is perfect, because Centennial Racetrack used to be west of there forever. It was a huge fixture over there, and I think that captures that area. I think that's what that area has been named. And I mean, some of these names are probably a little bit different than what I thought they might be, but I just love the work that you all did. I think the Duncan Park neighborhood, Duncan Park is pretty new, but the school was named Duncan, and I think the neighborhood was really probably Duncan before the school was there. So I do think that you have captured the historical piece of what's going on, and I think that is what is very exciting to me, is that we have a history that goes back farther, really, even than Cinderella City. And it is important for us to remember our history. So thank you very much for all the work you've done.
Thank you, Member Russell. I'll ask a couple of questions, and I think one goes to Mayor Pro Tem's comment. But in regards to Clayton and Cinderella City, obviously you went through 3 iterations, or at least 3 drafts of this. Did you happen to get comments from citizens that were also in favor of changing the name Clayton, or Cinderella City to something else? Was that like 50-50, or I'm just trying to weigh the ask by Mayor Pro Tem?
Well, I'll have to go back and look through. I mean, the survey results are a lot of them. I do recall with Cinderella City, there were people in favor of and people that weren't. And it's hard to take that vote, right? Because to Councilmember Nunnenkap's point, this is kind of designed by committee. Not everybody's going to be happy. It's a matter of getting to the middle. But as goes with Cinderella City, there were people very much in favor of it, and then there were people that were against it. I believe, and I don't know if you recall, or we have to go back and take a peek at the survey results, but do you recall if there was?
I only recall one survey response about the schools that you already referred to.
Yeah. So we can go back and look at the Cinderella City points again, and look at that again. As goes with the school, there was just the one point there, and there wasn't a whole lot of other trend there. But to be totally honest, there's some of these areas that were more difficult to name than others. One of them was Belle Isle, and the other one was Leland Heights. So to your point, Mr. Woodward, Councilmember Woodward, Belle Isle is an interesting name, but that was one of the more difficult ones actually to name, to find, some history associated. But actually, that's kind of the exception there. But Leland Heights was another similar challenge. But we can certainly look at if council's in support of changing Leland Heights to Clayton. We can certainly take a look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Crabtree. And just a second question.
Mhm.
During your research over all of this, were any names that were considered controversial? Just asking, just to ask. So,
Yes, there were. In the Jason Park area, there is a neighborhood called Chicken Ranch Estates. I figured that probably wasn't going to, not to say controversial, just strange. There's an area up near Forest Hill in Yale Heights area. They call themselves Donkey Ditch. And there's an area in Bannock that's named after Spear. It's probably not the same Spear of Denver, but there's a lot of history with Mayor Spear in Denver that we probably don't want to associate ourselves with. So that to your point, that was definitely a thought. Don't name a neighborhood after something that you're going to have to change it for in the future.
You did your work, Mr. Crabtree. Mayor Pro Tem.
For what it's worth, I think you've sold me on Cinderella City. Your comments to Member Wink and Woodward and Russell, I think, kind of filled out what was missing for me.
Mhm.
And I think upon hearing a little more about the plan, it will fit better than I originally thought it will. So I'll lend my consent to that. Leland Heights, I have to live with that name every single day of my life.
Okay.
I will fight you to the death on that one.
Hey, that's fine.
so I'd like to see that one change.
Madeline, what's the process for this at this point?
We can make those changes. I do you want to? We can probably discuss that at the next HPC meeting.
Is there any further action that has to be taken by council for an agreement on that?
Actually, I was going to ask Mr. Crabtree if council was okay with the change. Actually, Member Noonan can pass something to state.
I just have a question before we try to reach consensus on that. You mentioned that Leland Heights was difficult to name. Where does the name come from? And was there anyone that you spoke to or heard in the survey? Now I'm asking you to recall distant memories, who was like, yes, we're Leland Heights. Or can you give any more information since we're trying to make this decision?
So Leland Heights is Leland Sunset. There's a neighborhood in there called Leland. There's a neighbor in there that's called Sunset, and the combination, I believe, it's Sunset Heights. So originally there was a portion in there that was called Leland Sunset Heights, and that went further up closer to Bellevue Park. The Whitaker name was pretty clear. I mean, that technically speaking, that's actually a little bit closer to Bellevue Park, but still does encompass that area a little bit. But the Leland Heights was kind of a little pocket that was left there. And so we went with the previous name that had gone along the edge of Bellevue Park. And there is a corner there of Leland Heights that was Sunset Leland Heights, but that was based largely upon the original subdivisions that were in that area. So that said, I don't remember. There was a lot of feedback around Bellevue Park. There was a little bit of feedback, I think, in Duncan Park area. And Jason Park received a fair bit of feedback, I believe. Centennial Acres. I'm doing this all from memory. There were so many survey responses. But there were pockets of the city that like Jackson Heights. We received that had been taken out. Jackson Heights had actually been taken out, and Jason Park had gone all the way to Broadway, and Rotolo had gone all the way to Broadway. And there were quite a few people that actually came back and said, "Whoa, no, I live in Jackson Heights."
Mayor Pro Tem, did you have something to say, or just? I saw that you were reaching for your button, but no, I'll just open up to council in terms of just the change that was requested by Mayor Pro Tem. If there's any comments regarding that.
I'll note that I'm not married to Clayton, but I am largely against Leland Heights. I'd even possibly be okay with Sunset Heights.
Okay. What can I ask? Any further background on it?
It's just the way it strikes me. I don't know. I can't really describe it. It's just the feeling, and
Sure.
So.
Well, we'll take that back and let the commission know and go from there, I guess. And any other, I mean, I'm not sure how this works. Study session, I guess you can't vote, but
we could give direction at this time in terms of just whether to move forward with the draft as is, take Mayor Pro Tem's change into consideration. Obviously with the work, I didn't do any of this research. Obviously, the HPC has been working on this for a couple of years now, actually more than that, talking to citizens, boots on the ground. For me to make a change when I don't know the history of that area would be very hard for me to make, and just make the change. I can understand Mayor Pro Tem's point of view, but I would leave it to the HPC in terms of just which direction they want to go with the name, just because you've done the work. So that's the way I feel on it. But anyone else want to chime in? Member Russell.
I actually would like to leave it to the HPC also to make the decision because you all have done a lot of work on it. And you, you know, Mayor Pro Tem, actually, I've lived in 3 different areas of the city. If you don't like it, really, you could look for a new home. I'm just kidding. Thank you.
Member Woodward.
Thank you. I would agree with Councilmember Russell on that. I would like to leave it to you and the historical people. Got another point, and it has escaped me.
I will let you think on that, Member Woodward, and I'll go over to Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm going to make one final pitch for a change here. And I'm going to say Clayton has much more significance to this neighborhood than the name Leland Heights, and arguably is equally as historic. That school has been there for a very, very long time. With that in mind, part of the purpose of this project is to establish neighborhood identity. There is neighborhood identity around Clayton Elementary School in my neighborhood, where I live, where I have to deal with that name every single day. There is not neighborhood identity around Leland Heights. There might be some historic value, but I find it very difficult to justify the argument that the name Leland Heights has the same historic value as the name Clayton, which still stands today, which is where all of our kids in that neighborhood go to school. So I don't know if that changes the perspective of either of my fellow council members, but I'm strongly advocating for a change here.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Noonkamp.
Thank you for that. I'm inclined to agree with some of my colleagues here and to let you guys make this decision. I know that maybe it's not the kindest opportunity for you to say, we really think you're the experts here, but you do have so much knowledge. You've engaged with the community over the last year on this project, more than a year. And I really trust you on this kind of nuanced decision that I don't live in that neighborhood. I don't have quite enough information. So I do feel comfortable with the map as is, but would defer to you about a change. But I will also say, in our community, we hear from a lot of residents about concerns about change, concerns about the community change, about new people coming, about Inglewood changing. And I think that this project is such a powerful opportunity to invite new residents of Inglewood into the city's history, to say that this is our story. This is where we've been. This is where we're going. Cinderella City is part of who we are. It's part of the narrative that's incredibly been impactful in our city. And I'm excited for the new residents who are coming to be able to dig deeper by some of these neighborhood names into what it means to be an Inglewoodian. So thank you so much for the work on this.
Member Woodward.
Thank you. I kind of remember here, Leland Heights. I mean, I would throw out there before Clayton. I mean, Clayton has been there since the 50s that I'm aware of, maybe longer. But who was the farmer? Who was the homesteader? Was that any historical significance there? I'm just curious as to, and I'm not looking for an answer right now, but I mean, I'm sure there were farmers in this area. We have one here named Scarrett that was pretty big in Inglewood. And hopefully everybody knows who that was. So I would suggest taking a look at something like that too. I'm not saying no to Clayton. I'm just saying I would like to see you folks come up with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. I too would like to defer to you all, as much as I want to support you, Mayor Pro Tem. And one more point, I see this new chapter in terms of how we define ourselves. It's a piece of it. I see it as an opportunity for learning and and growth in a sense. So where we may not know that much about X, Y, or Z, I think in terms, speaking to that question from Member Noonenkamp, in terms of how we socialize these names, so what the neighbors ask for in reaching out to the neighborhood group within the city, what we might do in terms of tying these new designations to our wayfinding and placemaking plan. All of those facets, I think, will in a way help us learn more and grow more. And so, while some of us in relation to some of these names might not know very much, or this means this to me, I don't know, I kind of look forward to learning and maybe celebrating some of what we don't already know. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Wink. No other comments from council? I think we gave you direction here tonight. Mr. Crabtree, Ms. Hinkfuss, thank you very much for the presentation tonight and all the work that you put into this. Obviously, there may be a couple of action items for the HPC, but thank you very much for the presentation. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. We're going to take a short break. I show 7:23 on the clock. If we could get back at 7:30 at the bottom of the hour, we have 5 boards and commissions here tonight to speak about the capital improvements project. So I'd like to get started on that. So 7:30, see you all back here.
And if we can have all the boards and commissions look for the name tag on the tables and arrange yourselves accordingly, that would be great. Thank you.
Additionally, attendees that are online, please accept the panelist invite. Thank you. Panelists, please accept the promotion to panelist from attendee over Zoom. Thank you.
refuse to use?
I'll use it now. I will use it for this reason. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. All right, council, if you could be seated. Is my mic on? Can you hear it? Oh, I don't hear it. Uh-huh. Council, if you could be seated. Yeah. Council, if we could be seated, we want to go ahead and get the capital improvements project started.
Mr. Whitney, please press accept.
All right, council, we'll get started. Jim. No, we're getting started. Thank you, everyone. We're now moving on to agenda item 7. It's the review of the preliminary 2023 capital projects list. So tonight this is the first time that we're actually going to have city council plus the boards and commissions all look at the capital improvements plan projects all at once. So we're all seeing it at the same time. Tonight's going to be more informational for anybody from the boards and commissions as well as council. We can go ahead and just ask questions in terms of the tier 1 projects. There may be some tier 2 or tier 3 projects that we may want to consider to move up as part of the budget process this year. But really, this is just a chance for council, boards, and commissions to ask questions to get a little bit of clarification as we move through this budget season. So I'll pass it over to City Manager Lewis to give a little bit more on this and get us started.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that we are so glad to have all of our boards and commissions here today, both in person as well as online. Tonight we have the Transportation Advisory Committee, Planning and Zoning Commission, Parks and Recreation Commission, Public Library Board, and the Budget Advisory Committee. And each of these boards and commissions have some responsibility, either in a very specific area or in a very broad area, to give feedback on the capital improvements plan. As you know, the most recent board that was given that authority was the Budget Advisory Committee, and this is really the first time I think ever that we've had all of our boards and commissions at one time that are weighing in and helping you have a discussion, really an opening discussion, so we all hear the same information about what the CIP should look like. By way of background on kind of the flow tonight, we're going to start with some of those more internal funds, the Conservation Trust Fund, Open Space, Golf Course funds, and then the council and the library boards can speak to their particular area. Particularly the library board that has one of those more narrow scopes. Then we're going to spend some more time on the public improvement and the CEPF, the Capital Projects Fund. As you know, these are really the bulk of what I consider kind of general fund, general governance type capital projects. And we have two boards that have recommendation authority on all of those items. And the other point that I'll make is that we have a very unique opportunity tonight. I won't be the first to mention this, but we have really kind of a windfall, a one-time windfall, because of the incredible amount of development going on in this community of 3.3 million that's being added. It can only be added to your capital budget. It can't be used for other purposes, but that's specifically related to building use tax. So it's over $3 million. So we're as close as we've ever been to being able to fund tier 1 projects in the budget. But we still are going to have to make some cuts because I think it's 8.6 and we only have 8.3, I believe. So, I think I might have the numbers off a little, but it's somewhere very close. But I do just want to point out this is very much a one-time. We will probably not see this level of development for many years. And then last but not least, I'll mention that we are going to have the CIPs for the enterprise funds last, so that our library, Parks and Rec board can exit if they want to. They don't have to stay for the whole presentation. But just again, appreciate your time as well as the time of our boards and commissions. And I'll turn it over to Finance Director Loh.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, everyone. We decided to have this joint meeting with the council, with the board, commissions, and committees, because we want, when I talk to council member about the 2023 budgeting process, we asked the council if it would be a good idea to have a combined study session for all the committees, boards, and commissions, hear the same information. And it seems this idea is well perceived by council members, and council members want to know the questions other boards, commissions, committees may have. So what we're going to do is, after we hear the discussion tonight, all the boards, commissions, committees will prioritize and recommend the capital improvement fund list to the city manager's office by June 9th. And the finance staff will prepare a matrix listing the recommendations side by side, including staff recommendation for council's final approval in June. And so let me cover the flow tonight. This is a budget calendar. We had a strategic planning session in January. We reviewed the revenue and expenditure assumptions 2 weeks ago. Tonight, we're going to review the preliminary 2023 capital project list with all the board, commissions, and committees. And they, by charter, will provide their recommendation to city manager's office by June 9th. Then we're going to prepare the side-by-side comparison and present the list to council in June. If the staff capital projects estimates and listing changes after tonight, we are going to indicate the changes clearly in the matrix listing when we review the list in June. And the Budget Advisory Committee has a special recommendation annual report for board. They're going to present their recommendation to council by August 1st, 2022. And these are the committees. They have the authority and responsibility to recommend the budget, the CIP list to council. Tonight we have Planning Zoning Commission, Budget Advisory Committee. Water Sewer Board has reviewed the capital projects for the water sewer projects, so they are not present tonight. A Library Board, Transportation Advisory Committee, ETAC, and Parks Rec Commission. I want to remind council this is our strategic outcome for 2023. We did present a CIP list based on the 7 outcomes. You can see the all projects presented, broken down by these 7 areas, and a tier 1 projects. We created a new strategic outcome, community well-being. For this presentation, all the projects listed under community well-being is under infrastructure and transportation. But after when we present the final to council in June, we are going to allocate some of the projects from infrastructure to community well-being category. And I want to cover the flow tonight because we really want the commissions, boards, committees, they can only recommend a CIP within their purview. For example, the Parks and Rec, they can speak into the projects under Conservation Trust Fund, Open Space Fund, Golf Course Fund, and the projects listed PIF, Public Improvement Fund, and Capital Project Funds. For Library Board, they can speak into the projects under the Public Improvement Fund and Capital Project Funds. And at ETAC, they can speak into the projects in Public Improvement Fund, Capital Project Funds, and all the projects listed Public Works. And Budget Advisory Committee and Planning Zoning can speak into all the funds, including the projects in Water and Sewer Fund. But a Water Sewer Board has the final authority over these projects. So I just want to go over the flow for tonight So the committee and board commission have the overview over these, authority over these funds, and projects can speak into, can give their thoughts and give recommendations. So this is the first conservation trust fund. You can see we list the estimated beginning balance for 2022, include the budgeted sources, budgeted uses, and this is the estimated ending balance for conservation trust fund. And we have designated funds for projects completion. These are projects designated for 2022 and before. You can see if we complete all the projects, we still have unappropriate fund balance at the end of this year. Then for the 2023 Tier 1 capital request for Conservation Trust Fund, 362,000. So we have enough fund balance to cover all the projects in Tier 1. The main sources for the Conservation Trust Fund comes from the Colorado State Lottery Funds. So this is a presentation we're going to go over. Then we're going to have the directors go over the details, their Tier 1 capital project under each fund. So we're going to have Director Parks and Rec to go over their Tier 1 project in Conservation Trust Fund.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Christine Underhill, Director for Parks, Recreation, Library, and Golf, and I'll be representing the Parks and Recreation Commission. So under Tier 1 projects for the Conservation Trust Fund, we highlight the Bellevue train, new wheels, new tracks annually that we look at repairing. The renovation plan for the Englewood Recreation Center, that's something we're actually going to be implementing this year and early next for renovating the front desk area and aquatic side where the offices are for training of lifeguards. And then also fitness equipment replacement. That's something we look at annually. We don't always replace annually because it's cheaper to buy in bulk usually with fitness equipment. And so that's something we build up every year, but do have money in there to replace if needed. And then Pirates Cove maintenance as well. And items that we're fixing up this year, wrapping the play structure, as well as painting the lazy river and doing some repairs around the park. So those are the Tier 1 projects for the Conservation Trust Fund. You want me to cover that? Okay. And then moving into our Open Space Fund, which is funded by Arapahoe County Open Space. We get a 1/4-cent sales tax. And typically it's about $1 million that we're awarded from Arapahoe County Open Spaces, in addition to grants that we have received in the past. And we are pursuing a grant this year as well, and I'll talk about that in a second. So this is some of the funding that we utilize for our flower beds. We have 25 different flower beds throughout our city that we put these funds towards. Tree replacement, this is different than the Emerald Ash Borer program. It's replacing trees or adding trees into our park system annually. Irrigation system replacement and repairs, that's something we definitely need in 30 to 40-year-old irrigation systems throughout our park system. We also fund 1.5 positions in our park maintenance side of the program. I think 20% is what can be allocated for a park maintenance worker from these funds. And then grant matching. So this year we're going for a grant for Bates Logan Park to do some improvements there, and some of that funding for 2023 would be allocated for that. And then also park planning and design. This is a big one. We are going to be updating the 2017 master plan in order to potentially pursue a 2023 bond. And so we'll be utilizing some of these funds with $100,000 to put towards updating that master plan to really find out where we stand in our park system and what is needed. And then we move into our golf course enterprise funds here with our capital projects. The biggest piece that we're doing this year, it's going to be implemented this fall, is replacing the irrigation system. It's quite expensive. I believe it came in about $1.9 million to do that irrigation replacement on the back 9. So much of our capital funds are going towards that. However, we still have need, and we are building the funds back up. We replace golf carts annually. Typically we get 12 carts a year as part of the program that we're in, keeps them up to date. And then also maintenance equipment, the mowers, the bunker rakes, things like that are replaced annually at the golf course to maintain the course.
Before we move to the capital improvement fund and capital project funds, do you have any questions about the projects listing in these funds?
Thank you, Director Lowe. And also for members, we'll start with questions from City Council, but any members of Parks and Rec Commission that happen to be online, if you want to raise your hand as well to ask any questions, I'll make sure to look over in that direction. But we'll start off with Member Noonekamp.
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of quick questions. One is under Open Space Fund. I do see that the Parks Rules signage is a Tier 3 project. It's also it's lower in budgeted cost. Is this just to update signage or is there not existing signage? Can you clarify that for me?
I sure can. So while it's a tier 3, we do have the funding in this program to update. So we just updated some signage at Duncan and Jason Parks regarding off leash. Some of that funding was utilized. So it's to replace signs as they wear out or put in new signs as rules change or changes are made to the parks.
So what you're saying is that we do already have the appropriate signage in all of the parks currently?
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful. And then my next question was just under open space. I see that we do have an unappropriated balance of 1.3. You're requesting 660 for Tier 1. Is that just based on the prioritization of what you think is Tier 1, but could move into the rest of the balance for Tier 2 and 3? Okay.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Member Russell.
Thank you. So my question is the park maintenance employee compensation. Why does this not come out of general fund rather than capital or the open space fund?
I'm not sure I know the true history on why that was designed that way. However, we are allowed, based off the county's IGA with us, to put 20% of the maintenance funds towards personnel. And so we've done that and been able to fund it for many years now, to my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
And Mayor, if I could, I believe that's, as Director Underhill stated, the way it was set up originally. But really, we want to maximize whatever these specialized funds allow us to put to staff. We really would like to put the max to, offset the costs that would otherwise be incurred in the general fund.
Thank you.
Member Woodward.
I was just going to address also those funds for maintenance. They weren't originally in the plan. And as the work was done in parks and open space was built out, the maintenance numbers were brought in the next time it came up for re-election, basically, for voter approval. And the different cities and parks, districts and stuff came up with that number, I believe, 20%. So it wasn't originally there. I do have a question on, let's see, with the Bellevue train, I see that a request for 2023 of 40,000, and then 2024 65,000, and then 2025 it drops down to approximately 18,000 and continues on from there. So there's major work going to happen for 2023 and 2024 on the train tracks and
Good question.
trestle.
So we're replacing all of the wheels currently on the train, so that should buy us quite a few more years. We are looking at getting an ADA car to add on to that, which would be costly to add in around that $65,000 mark. So that is what that's looking to do, is extend the train and replace one of the cars to be ADA compliant.
Okay, and then I did have a question on the request for 2023 under Tier 1 grant matching funds of 289,819.
Mhm.
So those, you're expecting the grant being roughly 290,000, and that's just the matching funds for that. And that designation for what it's for is part of this, everything else, right?
Correct.
The actual
Yep.
expenditure part.
Typically, when we go after grants, it's about a 25% match. So if we're looking at for a $500,000 grant, that's about what we'll be
Okay.
contributing.
Okay, so in a way, I guess what I was trying to figure out yesterday while I was looking at this matching funds. It's more of a revenue side thing at that point, isn't it? I mean, we're gonna spend the money, but it's a revenue, on the revenue side too.
Technically, yes, we're bringing in grant money,
Yeah,
and
so
that
it's a
helps
break
us to
even.
secure it.
Okay. Um, For 2023, you had tennis and basketball court renovations. Do you know where those would be located?
Those are under tier 2, so
Or,
we
yeah,
have
it's
not
tier two.
identified this year which for 23 what we may need to replace or repair.
Okay. Very good. That's all I had. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
So one of the tier 1 projects is Parks Flower Bed Program. And I haven't talked about this recently. In a 5-year period, we're spending $202,950 on flowers. And my understanding is that we generally use the types of flowers, I think they're called annuals, that are good for one season. We've heard some feedback from our citizens recently about using more native landscaping and more eco-friendly landscaping. Have we considered or looked into using the types of flowers that grow every year so we don't have to buy potted flowers on an annual basis and we could potentially save $200,000 over a 5-year period?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think that's definitely something we can consider and look at doing. I know our park staff are online, and I'm sure that is something that they have been researching. They've been working with CU and others with the pollinator garden, and there might be some options out there to extend this funding and extend the life of those flower beds longer.
Okay, that would be one thing I'd be very interested in seeing come forward in the future. Maybe not this year, but in subsequent years. The other question I have is in regards to the master plan. You mentioned the parks master plan. Have we done an analysis of where we are now, or is that part of the plan? And are we on track with what was planned in 2017? Or are we just saying we can't do that, so we're going to change the plan?
No, that's a great question. So what we want to do is we have done a lot of work in our parks through grants and other renovations. We're doing 3 parks this year, technically 4 with Jason as well. And so we want to make sure we reflect that in the master plan. We've checked a lot of the boxes off of items that have been completed. And so we want to make sure that's updated, reflected, and then also conveyed to our residents too of what we have planned, what they can see if this bond does pass. Another piece of the bond would be to renovate part of Pirates Cove and the Englewood Recreation Center aquatic side to add some more elements to that. So that master plan is going to help us come up with some designs for our parks so people can visualize what their neighborhood park will look like, as well as the 2 other locations of what they could become.
And that brings up a third question, which is the Inglewood Recreation Center renovations, $200,000. It feels to me like for as long as I've been watching this council, and certainly as long as I've been sitting on it, that has been a budgeted line item every single year, and it hasn't happened. Can you explain a little bit of the delay and what would make us believe that this could actually happen this year if we put it in the budget?
No, that's a great question. And renovations are happening this year. One of the items that we ran into that was a major piece that we had to address was the HVAC system. And working with Public Works, we are very close to getting that going and renovated. And then we can move forward with the front desk and the aquatic side. So we are much closer than we were a couple years ago. And so now that $200,000 will go towards getting those renovations complete. And there's still a lot of work to do over there, but that'll somewhat update the front of the recreation center as you walk in.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? If not, I'll ask any members of the Parks and Rec Commission, do you happen to have any questions? Not seeing any hands raised. If not, I'll pass it back over to you, Director Loh.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move to the capital project funds. The capital needs continue to outpace our available revenue. Our general fund property tax rate, 5.88 mil levy, has not been increased or looked at since 1980. So we're thinking about a long-term approach to funding the city's capital improvement fund. Please remember, like city manager mentioned, we have a huge plan review project. We received $3.3 million from building use tax revenue that will be applied to the capital Improvement Fund. So normally we only receive 5 million from our vehicle use tax and a building use tax. So this year for 2023, we have approximately 8 million. But currently we have Tier 1 2023 capital project requests exceeding 8.9 million, so we still have a gap. But just remember tonight, we are not prioritizing these, the list tonight. We just want to ask a question, ask the staff what their need. So all the directors from IT, Public Works, Court, and Communication will take turn to answer your question to also justify the need for the Tier 1 projects. So this is the current Public Improvement Fund balance, beginning balance and estimated balance for 2022, 18 million. If we could complete the projects, 16 million, it will give us 2 million. These are estimates. But a Tier 1 capital request total 6.7 million. As I mentioned, the main source of funds for capital improvement fund is vehicle use tax, building use tax, and Arapahoe County road and bridge taxes. So let's take a look at the Tier 1. The first one is the wayfinding and placemaking requested by Communication Department.
Thank you, Mayor. And Director Loh, I forgot I was supposed to do this one. So this is part of our wayfinding master plan, and working with Public Works and the Communications Department, we are allocating, about 170,000 for the next few years. What I think that this projection does go out a little longer than necessary is that I think after about year 3, we will have most of these gateways, particularly secondary and primary gateways, which are already in design. A few of them, the secondary gateways, are already under construction. So I don't think that those 26 and 27 years will be necessary. But it is a very extensive plan. Those of you that were on council when that was adopted, it's not just gateways. It's also a new banner program. It's trailblazer signs that get people to the high school and to other points of interest throughout the community. So we do, want to allocate reasonably some money to that each year, and that's what this represents.
Thank you, City Manager. Did you want to keep going and talk about it all at once towards the end, or should we just ask questions now?
We could stop by when each director present their need within their department. Then we can pause and let council and the commission board committee members ask questions before we move on.
Thank you, Director Loh, and I believe this is the only one for communications, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so any questions from council? Member Russell.
Thank you. So my question is, and I totally understand the gateway signage and things like that, but some of the signage, wasn't the DDA supposed to help us with some of the signage, especially in the downtown area?
Yes, that's correct. And thank you for the question, Member Russell. We are not actually projecting in these projections the signs for, entrance signs into the downtown district. We do anticipate that the DDA will pay for their own wayfinding, which frankly is a big bulk of it. Getting people to the hospitals is a big part of that, getting people to city center. And so we do anticipate that the DDA will greatly supplement the costs of this plan.
So, but this is our projected share, is that correct?
I'm going to actually turn that question over to Director DeAndre because they may have actually figured in those DDA signs in these projections.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. Actually, we did not. So we anticipated that their funding was separate from this. What we did project was anticipating the Tier 2 signs or the Priority 2, but then anticipating potentially 1 to 2 of the entrance monuments per year.
So you may remember there was, one of the gateway signs is when you come under Dartmouth, and it, calls for a big painting kind of mural, welcome to Inglewood there. That's going to be well over 100,000 to do those. We are working with a couple of local sign makers on a gateway coming from Littleton on Broadway into Inglewood. That's probably going to be somewhere in the $50,000 to $100,000 for that sign. So, you know, it's expensive to acquire, in some cases, the right of way, the construction, you know, that is going up in terms of steel in particular prices. So we're anticipating those costs in this estimate.
Thank you very much.
Any questions from our boards or commissions on this? Seeing none, I'll pass it over to Director DeAndre.
Good evening. I'm Maria DeAndre, Director of Public Works. I'll touch briefly on the Public Improvement Fund projects for Public Works. Starting with alley maintenance. So this, we just approved council approved a contract just at the last meeting to move forward with alley maintenance work for Zone 3 and Zone 5, and that will complete the majority of alley maintenance throughout the entire city. What this reflects is just some relatively minor amounts to go back out and touch up areas where, as we noticed in Zone 2, which was our first zone that we did, alleys that were either steeper or just needed some additional touch-up work for whatever reason. And so we know that we'll experience some of those, and so this is just a placemaker. And hopefully that dollar amount, as you see there, will continue to go down over time. Also, as we potentially implement an alley paving program, that we would see less alley maintenance needs over time. The pavement maintenance by area, again, we're working through the zones. And you can see there a pretty significant increase from previous years where we were about anywhere between 1.5 to 1.8 million. And that $3 million really reflects the analysis that we did mid-part of last year where we did a street rating of every single segment and identified the financial need for roughly $3 to $3.5 million per year. We do have some ARPA funds that were dedicated by council for the next couple of years to supplement that. And as you can see there, that is going up slightly in the 5-year period. Then the neighborhood traffic calming program, some of the tiers here are a little bit off. That we're showing that in 2024. The Dartmouth Avenue reconstruct west of Santa Fe. This would be the gap, if you will, from the edge of the CDOT right-of-way for Santa Fe to the edge of the easternmost part of our Dartmouth Bridge widening project. So there is a gap in there that we'd like to fill and basically reconstruct that portion of pavement. So that we're looking to identify that and possibly complete that even with the Dartmouth Bridge widening project. Then, as you can see there, the bottom line, road and bridge, that's annually, that's where we had put the pavement maintenance dollar amounts, but now we've changed that a little bit to reflect those are the materials that our street staff use for road patching, crack sealing materials, pothole patching, all of that. So we do identify that as a capital need because it's part of our larger pavement management program, even though those are materials that are being utilized by staff. Then on an annual basis, we also do transportation system upgrades. These are primarily for things associated with our traffic signals. So this might be new cameras, new controllers, lamps, all of that sort of equipment that goes into keeping our signal system up to date. Then we have the city's share of the concrete utility program. If you're familiar with that, the cornered lots are not 100% assessed to homeowners. Instead, the city picks up a portion of those corner lots, as well as lots where adjacent to parks, public right-of-way, as well as any of the pedestrian ramps at the corners. Those are paid for by the city and not by homeowners. Walk and wheel implementation. This reflects funding based on the update that was completed for the walk and wheel plan by our community development department. So those projects, those preliminary projects are being prioritized. And as you can see there, the funding goes up from year 3 on. Again, some more signal equipment upgrade and replacement. Concrete program, accessible ramps. This is a set aside for additional ramps. This is to keep up with ADA guidelines. So the 350 that you see there over time has was doing some ramps, but it's gone more and more to the concrete replacement. And so we needed to amend that to identify accessible ramps to stay in compliance with the ADA guidelines at the federal level. We have identified the need, and you may have seen this in a council request tracker, that Union Avenue is functionally obsolete. And so it does need some work. That does not mean that it's in danger of structural danger, but it does need some work on the bridge deck. And so we've identified for 2023 that we would start the design process and the evaluation process to then complete those repairs for construction in 2025. Then the Santa Fe PEL bike ped improvements. This is a placeholder. We have, Arapahoe County has submitted a regional grant application through the DRCOG TIP process to, for 5 to 6 bike ped improvements that have come out of the Santa Fe PEL study. That will potentially, this would be the city's match towards the other match between Arapahoe County, Littleton, and Sheridan to jointly fund those projects if they move forward. So this would be a match for those regional dollars if we were successful in receiving that. Traffic signal replacement, just due to staffing, we have foregone that in 2023. And then we'll pick that up again next year when hopefully we can start to get, have that, we're targeting traffic signals this year as part of our asset management program. And so we'll have a better plan by 2024 of how to prioritize signals for replacement and upgrade. Yes. And then before we turn it over to Parks, Rec, and Golf, I do want to mention we did leave one Tier 1 project off inadvertently, and that again was for a match with the City of Littleton. We're potentially pursuing with them, as well as with Centennial and Douglas County, and potentially Denver, to do a Broadway corridor study to look at transportation improvements along there, as well as potentially bus rapid transit and some other mobility needs with those adjacent communities. Again, that would only be necessary, that $50,000, if the grant was successful and those other partners came to the table as well. So I'll answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from council? Member Russell?
Thank you. Would it be possible to consider sidewalk gap construction? At least some.
I thought we had that in here.
It's tier 2. It's
Okay.
not a tier 1 project.
Okay, here we go. Yeah. Yeah, it's about midway down there. Yeah, I think just given the needs, we did list that as a tier 2, but we can certainly consider that as a tier 1 potentially, and look, especially if some of these grant things don't work out, there might be the opportunity to move some of these around.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions from council? Actually, Director DeAndrea, I got a question, and actually I have a question of all the directors with this question. Are there any projects that we've either pushed out or have moved up or moved down in tiers over the past year?
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's a matter of not of funding, but of staff resources. So we've been unable to fill a couple of key positions within the engineering division, and that significantly impacts our ability to deliver projects. So we have had to look at, is this an absolute go, like the Oxford Ped Bridge? That is a yes, because we have grant funds that are basically sunset at a certain date. So we have to say, yes, we absolutely have to work on this one. Are there others that, because of funding or other priorities, that we can forego for a while? And we've had to do that internally.
I can also answer this question. Council members, in your package, you will see a one-page reconciliation sheet that will tell you the difference between year 2 and year 1. So this will tell you the 2023 budget and the difference between the 2022 budget. So you can see we add a few new projects for 2023. Also, we decreased the funding for some of the projects. If you want to know the difference between year 2, year 1, you can refer to the reconciliation sheet in your package.
Thank you very much, Director Loh. Member Woodward.
Thank you. I have a question a general question on the bridge that I don't even know, I guess you'd call it a bridge. It's part of the US 285 right west of Sherman.
Yes.
And if you walk on the Little Dry Creek Trail, looking at that bridge, actually Saturday from underneath, it's pretty scary looking structurally. I mean, there's rust and concrete, quite a bit of concrete at one end coming down. Is that a CDOT job, or is that something that's our responsibility?
Is it the one over Little Dry, or where the trail runs underneath, not over 285, but under where the trail is? So you're walking underneath.
You're walking underneath
Mm-hmm.
the highway at that area because there's no streets going across right there.
Okay, I'll have to check. If it truly is where you're under 285, then it would be CDOT's responsibility. If it's where I'm thinking it may be ours. I'll double check that and check on the sufficiency rating of it. But basically, all bridges within the state that are over 20 feet are checked every 3 years by a contractor. So that goes for both CDOT bridges as well as all local bridges. So we have a report every 3 years of the condition.
Okay. Thank you. I'd just like to compliment also on the traffic light situation in the city of Englewood. My experience is it's never been better than it is right now. I mean, trying to cross major north-south streets, you come up to it and all of a sudden the light goes. I mean, at times the light will change within seconds.
Well, we do have special programming for city council members. So
I see.
Just kidding.
That's what's on my truck then. That's what makes it so much better. Okay, well, just my compliments to them. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
So we see here in tier 1, pavement maintenance by area, $3 million. And then we go further down into tier 2, and there's a line item of $500,000 for street reconstruction. How much street reconstruction are we doing in our regularly scheduled pavement maintenance?
yes, so when we say street reconstruction, that truly is completely reconstructing a street. So that would fall outside of our pavement management program. We have not done much, if any, complete street reconstruction in the past, with the goal of being that we shouldn't have to. Streets should last, with regular maintenance, hopefully between 80 to 100 years, without the need before, or the utilities underneath would preclude that, where we'd need to do full reconstruction. But there are certain segments where we just can't salvage them anymore. And so I think we need to start, again, planning for some level of reconstruction going into the future.
Can you elaborate a little bit on a reconstruction? Is that when we actually go down to the dirt?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And even we would likely coordinate with utilities to replace the utilities, and then we'd even scarify or mix up that top layer of dirt, replace that with road base if that's necessary, or thicken that even before putting on new courses of asphalt. So right now our pavement management typically consists of removing just usually that top maybe 2 to 3 inches at the most.
Okay, that settles it for me. Thank you.
Member Noonekamp.
Thank you. I noticed that the Old Hampton Complete Streets is listed as a Tier 2 project. I know we've discussed this and that there is an element of that that's already underway. Can you just explain the rationale of putting that in Tier 2 and not Tier 1?
Yes, thank you. That should be a Tier 1. So our intent is to submit for a federal grant application this summer, June timeframe. And so again, if we were successful, the intent would be is to move forward on this timeframe. That may have been why we listed it as a Tier 2, but it should be a Tier 1, anticipating that grant application and that being successful.
And what if we don't get the grant? Is there a concern about not getting the grant, and then how does the project move forward? And will we know about the grant before we have to approve this?
Yes, we should. We should know about the grant. But I think given the large dollar amount, I think it would be a more of a policy discussion if we didn't get the grant, if the city or if the council wanted to put this much money towards that, just that one segment.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Director DeAndre, did you have another? Oh, sorry. Director DeAndre, there are a couple line items here about lighting, and I'm trying to think of the acronym that kind of like public safety for environmental design or whatever it is. Have we done kind of like in background on where we would add lighting if we were to move in that direction? Is that part of this, or is it just another asset management aspect that we have to take into account?
Yeah, so the majority of streetlights within the city are actually owned by Excel Energy. So if you look out, the Cobra headlights are owned, and we just pay a maintenance fee for relamping them and then the electricity costs throughout the city. They are typically, you have a standard for those at, let's say, a residential and a residential street intersection. You might have one street light at the corner. For a collector street and a collector street, you might have two. What I've noticed in Englewood, it's pretty haphazard. So I think we thought that this might be easy to just add a few here and there, and we do need to do more asset inventory and work with Excel to better identify where all the missing lights are and then start to prioritize those. So I think that is a first step to identifying where the needs are first with Excel's help.
Thank you, Director DeAndre. That's something that I would like to see in the future. Obviously, it doesn't affect the budget for this year, but any questions from our boards and commissions? Don't see any, so I think now back with Director Underhill to talk about the two, I think there's two, Parks and Rec. Thank you, Director DeAndre.
We have two items for Parks and Recreation. This is a second funding source for the Recreation Center renovation that we'll be implementing for the $200,000, and then the Parks and Rec parking lot maintenance. So we've been doing pretty well updating our parking lots. The Recreation Center, Malley Center, and Farm and Train lots are what's next on the list.
Any questions, Mayor Pro Tem?
Just to be crystal clear on this, because I did notice this appears to be duplicative for the rec center upgrades. Are we spending $400,000 or are we spending $200,000?
It's actually closer to $1 million out of, yeah. We have multiple funding sources on this one, utilizing the open space as well.
Mayor Pro Tem's watch is going off right now.
You said two. Oh, four. Yeah, 4 million totally. Yeah. So ultimately, this is multiple funding sources where we're not taking just from one fund to complete this project.
Okay, so when we see this line repeated, it's indicative that we're adding money to the
Correct.
project.
Okay.
Any other questions from council? Any questions from our boards or commissions? Seeing none, I think I'll pass it back to you, Director Loh. Thank you, Director Underhill.
Great, thank you. Then we're going to review the capital project funds, the fund balance, and the projects requested. The capital project funds, we have estimated beginning balance 2.9 million, have estimated sources and uses. Estimated ending balance for 2022 is close to 3 million. If we could complete all the projects, the current projects and past projects, we will have an appropriate fund balance of 220,000. But the tier 1 capital request for capital project funds is 2.2 million. So let's take a look at this list. The first one on the list is IT. Damn, IT.
Tim, you're up.
Sorry about that, Mayor. And Director King unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, and so I'll try my best to answer basic questions that you may have. But if you have more complicated questions, he and I would request that you enter them as council requests, and he will be happy to answer them that way. And so there are three up here. The first two are relatively similar, so I'm going to take them kind of together. So network development essentially means the replacement of server and network hardware and restoring different items based on the warranty expiration dates. So servers in our storage area do need to be replaced in the next year as they are at the end of the life cycle. So that's why they're in here. Our PCs are on a 4-year replacement cycle. So every 4 years, PCs are replaced. Of course, there are times when things happen to PCs, as you all know, and so some funding is built in for those as well, and it's based on their expiration dates. And we do reuse, I guess I would say, PCs. So if they haven't met their 4 years, so if an employee leaves and a new employee starts, they're usually cleaned and checked and fixed. But we don't usually give brand new PCs every time someone starts. On fiber network, this one is obviously the big ticket of the three. So in 2021, IT finished a fiber network design, and the project total to install fiber in the city came to about $20 million. And so the $1 million each year is identified to finish the project in a 20-year period. The goal also is to look at other funding sources. So there are grant opportunities and some funding opportunities that could potentially come from the state and federal government. And so IT is wanting to look into those as well. But they designed the core network of the fiber system to support all the city's assets, including things like the municipal buildings, parks, SCADA, which is a system that's utilized in places like I believe our sewer plant, which stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, as well as things like traffic signals and other really important things that we need to utilize to run all of our services as a city. In the design, they tried to think of everything and that there'd be enough capacity to support the city for about 30 to 50 years. So those are the three Tier 1 projects for IT.
Thank you. Any questions from council? Member Noonekamp.
Please feel free to defer this question if appropriate. But I do want to ask about the fiber. And from your presentation, you made it sound like there might be additional funding, but maybe we haven't looked into that yet. Can you provide clarity on that?
Sorry, yes. So I believe that Director King has looked into it. It's that we're not sure exactly what the opportunities will be in the future. Some have been released, whereas others are more. He's very active in a group called Seagate. That's basically a group of municipal IT leaders. And so in those meetings, they've mentioned possible opportunities, but a lot of them haven't materialized. So right now, it's really more that we're monitoring things that could happen, but we haven't. I don't think he's identified, I could be wrong though, any specific ones. It's more that we're just monitoring opportunities that may come up.
And Mayor, if I could add to that.
Please.
Specifically, both ARPA and the infrastructure bill identify fiber, backbones as important and eligible expenditures. The problem is those are almost always in rural areas. So almost everything that we're seeing right now at the federal and state level for fiber and interconnectivity is based, prioritizes rural, which of course we wouldn't qualify for. But we definitely are, as the Assistant City Manager said, keeping our eyes open.
That's very helpful. And can you share, and maybe even anecdotally, are we experiencing any significant difficulties with the current network capabilities that we do have?
That I will need to ask Director King.
No problem. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Any questions from our boards or commissions? You're off the hook, Tim. We know just as much as
Thank you.
So.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Eccles.
Thank you. My question was just kind of generally as to the fiber optic infrastructure. It would consist of buried and underground fiber along with aerial fiber, or do we know how the implementation looks at this point?
That's a great question. I'm sure Director King could answer, but unfortunately, I don't know if our city manager can. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I could take another stab at that. And speaking with both the former IT director and Director King, the plan is to have an underground fiber optic ring that is essentially built by connecting city facility to city facility, which then at some point, other users, kind of high, network, high data users could tie into. As you know, many cities in the state and the country are moving towards municipal broadband. That is not necessarily the goal right now, is to make sure that city facilities and key assets are connected, but it would all be an underground system.
I forgot Mr. Eckel is in the business, so. Any other questions from boards or commissions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Tim. Back to you, Director Loh.
We have two more departments from Public Works and Parks and Rec Library and Golf.
It's just the facilities and operations. So in late 2021, we actually created a 5-year plan for maintenance at all city facilities. So what's reflected there, you can see the dollar amounts jump around a little bit, but that we have identified a plan for each of those years going out into the future. And then the ADA compliance projects, is just as it says, is a placeholder for once we do our ADA audit, which is scheduled to be completed in 2022, that there would be a list of prioritized projects that would come out of that we would start to tick off over the next several years. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director DeAndre. Any questions, Council? Mayor Pro Tem?
On the facilities and operations line, how much of that money are we spending on the building we're sitting in right now?
Yes, so there is a portion of that within that budget line item for the Civic Center. And I think what we talked about with the city manager and with the department heads is that given the nature of the potential redevelopment here, that we will be scrutinizing all of those expenditures before we move forward with them going
Great,
into
thank
the
you.
future. Yes.
Any other questions from Council?
Yeah. Any question about tier 2 or tier 3 for Public Works as well?
Any questions from our boards or commissions? Seeing none. Oh, Member Russell.
I do have a question under a tier 3 project where it's annual common area furniture replacement. So that common area furniture, did it include furniture like would be out here in the foyer for the court system? Because it hasn't been there for a long time. And I understand the reason that it's not there, but I also understand that there are a lot of people that come here for court or for whatever. Well, I suppose there's benches in the courtroom, but I mean, this is the city center. I think that people need a place to sit when they come in.
Yes, we have removed quite a few of the furniture out on the second floor as well as on the third floor in the atrium. This item, when we say common area, is not only kind of these public spaces, but also meeting rooms. So departments are responsible for their own furniture within their office. Let's say we need to replace some office furniture. This is kind of covers those generalized areas for all employees.
Okay, but I would like to consider some public area furniture also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Woodward.
Thank you. I have a question under tier 3, $500,000 for badge system. What is a badge system?
Tim, you're back up.
A patch system is essentially a fix. So it's fixing, basically fixing an error, I believe, in a system, a network system.
Badge, not patch.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I thought you said patch. A batch system I'll have to look into. But
Okay, I can't imagine it's the card key system or anything like that. It's
sorry, badge system. Excuse me, sorry, I didn't hear that correctly. Yeah, the badge system is the badges that were issued as part of the city. So this is a system that would basically improve how we issue badges. Right now, we do outsource some of it, so there's some challenges with it. One of the reasons I think Director King did put it as a tier 3 is that obviously, as you know, we may be moving buildings, and so there may be some shifting, and so he didn't want to prioritize it in the event that we moved and there would be a new building. But he did want to put it on the tier 3 list to highlight the fact that we do need to at some point address how we do badges.
okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from Council? Seeing none, I think we're back to Parks, Recs, Library, and Golf. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, we have 4 items on here. Whoop. There we are. So the art in public places, 1% out of Fund 31 goes towards funding that the Cultural Arts Commission is able to utilize to purchase new arts, murals, items like that. The next one is the emerald ash borer mitigation. So that 50,000 we've allocated annually is actually now going towards a grant program that our residents can utilize, and that is in effect now, and it's live on the website if residents are interested in looking at ash tree removal or treatment of their ash trees. They can utilize some of this funding for that. There's 2 new items on here that came from our library board. After almost a year long of discussion related to capital need in the library, there's a lot of need. However, they did narrow it down to focus on some of the safety concerns that the library has, and looking at emergency exits being added into the library, as well as possibly a feasibility study for a single entry exit on the east side of the library. And granted, I know there are some changes to this building that may be occurring in the near future, but it's definitely of interest of the library board to focus on safety items, whether we're here for another year or next 5 years. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from council? Member Noonenkamp?
Thank you. I have a couple. One, on the art in public places, it's significantly larger in 2024 than the other years. Do you know why?
That's a good question. Jackie, do you know? It does jump. We'll have to look at that. That might be
Okay.
a misprint there.
That'd be great. Thank you. And then regarding the library exits, the feasibility study for the entry on the east side, would it be just closing off the entry on the other side? I'm trying to orient myself in the building, or is it adding a new entry point?
So the thought would be, and this is why we want to do a feasibility study, is to look at the north and south entry points where the lobbies come into to enter the library, and narrowing that down to one entry exit on the east side. So the 2 lobby entrances exits would be potentially closed, and then there'd be one entry point into the library.
And why would you look at adding a new entry point instead of using one of the existing?
The thought was from access. When you have the circle drive on one side and the parking lots, if you came on the circle drive, you'd have to walk around the whole building to come in the south side entrance, or if you parked in the garage and the north side was open only, you'd have to walk all the way around. So considering the various patrons that come into the library, putting an entry point right in the middle, from a security standpoint, the visibility of people coming in and out of the library, our security wouldn't be on a pivot constantly watching the 2 doors for people coming in and out.
And is the concern because there's only one security guard present? And would you also look into maybe just adding a second security guard, or is this versus doing the new exit?
We haven't dug into it too deeply yet as far as one security guard. We do have the full-time security guard down there, and that was one of the challenges that he's mentioned, is just there's people coming in from different ways. And so that was one option, is to limit the way people come in and out of the library. So there's good focal point on one entry exit.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Member Noonenkamp. Member Woodward.
I guess if I understood what was just said, I don't understand how one entry exit would meet fire codes or exiting codes. Would we still have some sort of exit to get out of the building on the garage side? And
Correct. Yeah, that's a good question. The goal would make those emergency exits, and that's what the feasibility study would look at: are we meeting fire code and safety regulations? The other thought too is adding more emergency exits near the children's area and right outside the parent room that's here on the north side. So there may actually be 4 different exits in addition to the main entry exit, if that's what the feasibility discusses.
so the current main entry would be closed up, and the main entry to the building then would basically be for the elevator, the stairs. That's it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Ms. Nolan, online.
Thank you, Mayor Sierra. I wanted to just address the question regarding the arts in public places, the 1%. We do have a jump in capital requests in 2024 up to 18.4 million. And the 1% is based on the cost, or those cost estimates for capital requests in the Capital Projects Fund.
Thank you, Ms. Nolan. You actually saved me a question. Any other questions from council? Any questions from boards or commissions? Yeah, can we get you a mic? Mr. Lesage?
Kind of going off what Councilmember Woodward said, would it be better to do the feasibility study before we install the new emergency exits? Just kind of shaking up those two items.
No, good question. Yes, that would be the goal, is to look at the feasibility study prior to the other two to make sure that adding the exits that we're proposing make the most sense in the locations we're looking for.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lesage. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Underhill. Director Loh.
Okay, this concludes the presentation for all the projects under Public Improvement Fund and Capital Project Fund. And here's a question for council, the boards, commissions, and committees. When you compile a recommendation, think about if there are any Tier 1 project should not be included in 2023 budget, or should we move any Tier 2 or Tier 3 projects to be prioritized? Remember, the current funding gap is around $900,000. The following question is for the Parks and Rec Board, Library Board, and BAC, Budget Advisory Committee, and Planning and Zoning Committee. When you present your recommendation to City Manager's office by June the 9th, even we have sufficient funding under Open Space Conservation and Trust Fund, are the project listed in Tier 1 aligned with your priorities or aligned with city's strategic plan? So just want you to consider those things. We want to prioritize the projects. Also, we can apply reverse thinking. If we have to drop one project, what is the first one we need to drop? If we can think both ways, that might be easier for us to reach the conclusion, arrive at consensus. If you don't have any question, we're going to move to the Enterprise Fund for Public Works. The first one is Concrete Utility Fund.
Actually, before we get there, Director Loh, so for the rest of the discussion, are members of board and commissions needed for this aspect of it? And I actually do have one question before we jump to the enterprise funds, but did you want to answer the first part that boards and commissions have say in the enterprise funds?
I think the Budget Advisory Committee, Planning and Zoning Committee, they can speak into the enterprise fund.
Okay, perfect. So I guess one question I have, and this is something that we can discuss at a later date, but it has to do with the fact that we haven't raised, is it the mill levy? We haven't done it since like the 80s, right? And so I just wonder in terms of having this discussion moving forward, I know we're going to have the discussion at some point, but I wonder if it's very similar to, how we were treating the stormwater fund when we started this conversation with the stormwater fund back in 2018, where we only raised the rates for stormwater fund twice over a 20-year period. Do we need to think about it in terms of that, in the sense that there's many capital projects across the city that we're neglecting that potentially is an issue in future years that we're not going to do something about until something happens? So I know it's kind of a loaded question, but any comments on that, Director Loh?
So is your question, let me paraphrase your question, make sure I understand your question correctly. Are you thinking we might need to consider a property tax mill levy for some of the capital projects?
Correct. I think, in terms of just understanding what the impact is, but I know we're going to have this discussion at some point here in the near future, but City Manager Lewis, do you want to weigh in before Mayor Pro Tem weighs in as well?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Just as a reminder, we do have the taxation ballot question discussion on your next agenda, really focused on both kind of the public works infrastructure as well as public safety. So that will be next week.
Thank you, City Manager, Mayor Pro Tem.
I contrast property taxes and utilities fees because as the property valuation increases, the tax gathered on that valuation increases. So there's a natural inflation that occurs with property taxes. Whereas the problem that we ran into with utilities was the fee that we were charging was fixed over 20 years, which was in my opinion, a huge mistake. So I think those two things are different, and I understand your thinking. In the current market, it's difficult to pay for a lot of this stuff, which has been deferred over the years. But I think those are two very different animals.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, definitely agree with that as well, but just wanted to bring it up. We'll be talking about it more next week as well. But anything else from boards and commissions before we move to? We do have a question. Ms. Townley.
Thank you. And I apologize if this is out of order in terms of when to ask questions about different projects. So in terms of the ramp projects and looking at the strategic plan, would the funding for the ramp projects meet the strategic plan goals of 40 minimum ramps per year? I was just trying to get a sense of what you can do for that, I think $350,000. And then the other part of my question is just, I was a little surprised to see of, this large budget, that the way that the projects were kind of attributed to different elements of the strategic plan, that community well-being got like 0 points or 0% of that, whereas I think all of these projects should have a positive impact on community well-being one way or another. So I was just curious about that methodology and how none of them like really scored in that area for the strategic.
Thank you, Ms. Townley. Director Loh, did you want to
I
take a
can
stab at
answer the second question about the community well-being. Community well-being is a strategic outcome we added for 2023 and beyond. So most of the community well-being related capital projects are currently listed under infrastructure and transportation. So before we submit a final presentation to council in June, we're going to do the reclassification. I'll now have Director DeAndrea to answer the first question.
Yes, so the question was, is the 350,000 adequate to meet the strategic goal of, I believe we're shooting for 45 or so ramps per year? Thank you for making the connection between the strategic plan and that budget item. But yes, it is. So in 2021, we actually were able to complete about 110 ramps between our mill and overlay projects and this specialized ramp construction. So we are well on our way to achieving that goal, and I think I am comfortable that that dollar amount will achieve that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ms. Townley.
I have one more, Mayor. Sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Going back to the shortfall of about $900,000 and the discussion we had earlier about fiber, one of the things I would like to know is what any potential consequences are of not moving forward on that project now. So I think that one sticks out to me as something that could easily move.
Thank you for the question. We'll make that a council request.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Anything else from council? Or from boards or commissions? I don't see any hands up, but Director Loh, I think we're now on to enterprise funds.
All right, thank you. We're going to move to enterprise fund and start with concrete utility fund. So the library, parks and rec board members, thank you for your participation. If you have other priorities or enjoy the rest of the evening, you are welcome to withdraw. So now we're going to talk about concrete utility fund. The estimated ending fund balance for 2022 is 1.7 million. The current tier 1 capital project request, the total is 925,000.
Yes, so you can see there this fund goes specifically for sidewalk repairs. The funds do come from residents or property owners that contribute into this fund, and therefore it's used specifically for these two purposes. And as you can see there, it is increasing slightly over time based on our anticipated price increases. But we shoot for having roughly the same dollar amounts or the same quantities per year that we try and repair.
Any questions from council on the concrete utility fund?
Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Just kind of a general question in regards to quality control. We're investing a lot of money in concrete repairs and maintenance, what are we doing to ensure that we don't have to go back in another year and a half or 2 years and redo what was already done? Do we get a warranty from our contractor, or are we doing that as a city, or what? How does that work? Can you describe that a little bit?
Certainly, I'll double check on the length of the warranty. We do build that into the contract. I want to say it's a year, but I will have to follow up on that.
Okay, thank you.
Member Woodward.
Thank you. Concrete sidewalks, the residential areas, they're expected a life expectancy of 40 years or something like that?
Yeah, typically at least 40 to 50.
Okay. And if the sidewalk, residential sidewalk is lifted because of trees or something like that, it used to be a city expense of removing the tree, get rid of the tree or get rid of the roots, and the next time it was the land or the residents' expense. What is our policy on that now?
That's still similar to the way that we do it. So you're exactly right. Typically, when we see significant heaving, it's from tree roots that may be causing that in an adjacent tree, typically in the boulevard area. We try and cut the roots first without doing damage to the tree. And if that doesn't work, or it causes that same piece to heave again, then we will look at removing the tree. In the past, we have offered to give the homeowner a tree, and I believe we still do that. And then, but they don't plant it in the same area; they plant it a little bit further away.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Any other questions from council? Seeing none, we're now moving to Service Center.
Civic Center, you can see the estimated ending balance for 2022 is very low. The Tier 1 capital project request total 285,000. So this the source of the funding is from the department chargeback. So for the 2023 budget planning, we're definitely considered to increase the chargeback from other departments.
Yeah, and just some identified expenses here. Again, this is a limited focus fund to basically do upgrades to the service center. So we do have, again, kind of a 5-year plan for upgrading the various buildings out there. What's not reflected in this list at this time is a planned potential facility out there reconstruction. So we do need, or a construction of a new building. So we will have to budget that in at some point. But here, this is just our 5-year plan.
Any questions for council? Member Woodward.
Thank you. The funding for this, is it, I mean, the service center, they're billing different departments within the city and different municipalities outside the city for work done, correct? Is that where this funding, this estimated balance of 725,214 comes from?
It's actually just internally to the city. So for this particular fund, the service center fund, so we allocate it based on square footage of space. So police has some evidence storage out there, plus they have their lot where they store impounded vehicles. Utilities, public works, and parks maintenance make up the majority of that site. But we divvy that up based on square footage, and that's how we account for this. The pay into from other communities is from Cherry Hills Village and Sheridan under the service center fund, which is just the fleet aspect of this.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at this, at beginning balance of 725,000, ending balance December 31, 2022, $1,286. That's kind of scary, I think, when you're looking at this balance. So that in $725,000, you're not getting a lot of remodel done with that.
Correct, and this does reflect our anticipated uses for 2022. I know Director Loh directed or asked all of us to budget closely. I think we did too good of a job in this account probably, but they have already pointed this out to us, so we plan to scale back some of our upgrades, especially as we're considering potentially, remodeling or redoing some of that site. So we're conscious of that that close shortfall, and we'll be anticipating spending less in 2022 because of that.
Okay,
So we maintain a positive balance.
okay. I guess one of the things I'm wondering too is that, should that fee be increased? How long has that fee been that same fee to those, all the departments?
Yes, I think Director Loh has again informed us to look at those rates and see it that we should better reflect what our future anticipated costs are. And so we're planning to do that for this next budget cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? Seeing none, I think we're moving on to SURF.
This capital equipment replacement fund will have estimated beginning balance and resources and uses. The budgeted uses, these are estimates because we depend upon the spending plan. The numbers may change, but if we can spend down all the budgeted uses as planned, we're estimating funding balance $2 million at the end of 2022, and a Tier 1 2023 capital request total $3.5 million. This depend upon department chargeback, so I'll have you.
So again, we planned out about 5 years in advance of what our fleet replacement is anticipated to be, and those numbers are reflected there, and you can see that kind of ebb and flow over the next few years. We do go through on an annual basis and as you've seen items come before council, as we bring replacement vehicles before you, we do look at mileage, years of service, as well as maintenance and repair costs that go into our evaluation, not just the year of when they're due for replacement. So that's somewhat reflected. We are trying to normalize that to some degree, so it's a little bit more even. But as you can see, we have been drawing this down pretty significantly over the past couple of years as we've increased the number of vehicles that we've been replacing.
Thank you, Director. Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director DeAndrea. So on this figure for 2023, does that also include the police vehicles that we bought a year early? Are we going to have money left because we bought the vehicles this year?
Yes, so we should change that number to reflect that, because that if we get them this year, they will be an expense in 2022, not 2023. Good catch.
Thank you.
And also, these numbers do not include the auction proceeds received, right? So even we pay more for new cars, we get more from used cars. So.
Any other questions from council or from members of boards and commissions? See none.
Okay.
Go ahead, Director Loh.
And we'll move to stormwater drainage fund. The estimated funding balance $17 million. Tier 1 request for 2023 is estimated at a $4.5 million. You can see the fees, the sources of funds are coming from fees, utility fees.
Thank you, Director Loh. This reflects our project list. I won't go through this in detail. Really, nothing's changed from our plan from a couple of years ago of what we're trying to achieve. I will, we were able to complete the $10 million in bond revenue in July of 2021. We are about to close probably within the next month on our state revolving loan fund for approximately $23 million. So you can see that there's a significant amount of revenue that will be coming into the fund, but then we have a significant amount of expenditures in 2022, primarily for the South Englewood flood reduction project. But you can see here, we continue to pick off some of our high priority projects, the next one being the hospital project, which we plan to construct the stormwater in 2023, as well as complete some of these South Acoma drainage improvements. And we did present this information to Water and Sewer Board last month as well. So they were aware of the stormwater projects.
Thank you, Director. Any questions from council? Any questions from boards or commissions? Don't see any. Thank you, Director.
Now we're going to move to water, sewer, and South Platte Renew. We leave the best to the last, right?
Yeah, I understand I have 2 hours. Is that right? Thank you, Mayor and Council. Peter Van Rye, Director of Utilities and South Platte Renew. We're going to run through the Water Fund, the Sewer Fund, and South Platte Renew, our capital projects that we have identified. And if you're comparing notes, there's a couple slight changes from what you're seeing here compared to what was presented at the Water and Sewer Board. But I will point out the line item that's the most impacted and what's the most up-to-date numbers. So as you can see, we have on the Water Fund, we've been building a balance over several years, and the plan that came out of our financial planning over the past couple years is to spend that down and then couple that with issuance of debt in order to address the backlog of projects that has built up. So that December 31st, 2022 estimated ending balance of 14.4, that is likely going to be a higher number because our budgeted usages of 22,929, the third column, is we're going to actually underspend that because we are just not. It takes time to ramp up in terms of project managers and projects. They just take time to get going. And so we're often optimistic as to how fast we can get those executed. Fortunately, in this fund, when we don't spend the money, it returns back to the fund balance, and what it does is it all stays in the water fund, and so it just lengthens out the timing of those projects. So that's where that number is. Even though it says 14.4, the capital request is 15.1, where actually the fund will have a continuing ending balance for the next few years as we spend it down. Okay, so the major projects that we're looking at, we have an operations complex that we are going to be investing in. That's out at the service center. That's where we have a number of, right now we have a decentralized utilities department that's a number of our staff is in trailers, and a number of the buildings have not been invested in over the past several years. And so we're in the process of a space study and are working to advance a new utilities focused operations complex where we'll centralize the vast majority of the functions of utilities out at the service center. Within that, we have some improvements that need to be done to our Allen water treatment plant. We actually have some spaces that we think we can actually add some office space and be able to house the people at the plant more effectively. And so that's a more immediate project. EI&C is electrical instrumentation and controls. That's an annual investment that came out of the master plan. That's for all the electrical and controls that control the process. The PLC replacement, that's the programming logic control. That's the brains behind the systems. And if you recall, I talked about with our filters that we were at the point where the manufacturer no longer supported the PLC infrastructure, and so we had to go on eBay to get our parts. Well, I can report that project has been completed, and we have replaced that, and we now have a completely new state-of-the-art program logic control for the filters, which gets us up to date and current. Valve replacement, we just have some large valves near the Allen water treatment plant that we need to replace. A number of these are actually, if you see the similar number going through the 5 years, these are the programmatic investments. So as we're looking to replace our water distribution system over the course of the next several decades, you chip away at it year over year. So there's a design component. We also have investment in meters. That's to get us off of flat rate meters. Lead service line, you can see right there. What that assumes is that we are going to get an infusion of money from the feds, from the infrastructure bill. So we're planning for a significant ramp up in replacement of lead service line. It does rely on some of that funding coming through not only the WIFIA program, which we're in a little bit of an issue with right now on the water loan. We're working through, but also the infrastructure money. So that's where we're gonna fund that lead service line. Dredging and hauling, that's taking care of the ponds, the solids that are that result from the process. This is the one. This next one, raw water city ditch piping. This is the one. If you look at the Water and Sewer Board, we've actually accelerated that, so the bulk of the work is in 24 and 25. That way we can make sure that we're addressing that, this is the taste, odor, and hardness issue. So piping a city ditch is what we have determined to be the most impactful project to really address that for our community long term. Big Dry Creek conversion, completing that project, and that also will help taste, odor, and hardness because it'll allow us to divert really hard water from Big Dry Creek. And then some more annual replacements. That's the water line itself. McClellan Pump Station, that's a project that we're in the process of design right now. Allen Water Treatment Plant, we have a number of projects to improve processes there that are just in need of improvement. The Old Hamden system, this is where we're spending our ARPA funds to replace the water, sewer, and stormwater underneath Old Hamden. And then the distribution system valve replacement. So we have a number of valves out there. What'll happen is there'll be a break. Our crews will go out. They'll exercise a valve that hasn't been turned in 15 or 20 years. It breaks. Then we have to replace the valve. So we're at a point where we're trying to get a programmatic approach to actually exercising valves and replacing them. Oh, so that's it for water. So I can go through all three, or I can stop on each fund. Whatever way you'd like me to proceed.
Probably be best to go one by one. Any questions from council regarding the water fund? Member Woodward, you were first.
On that valve replacement, the last one that you mentioned, is there some sort of maintenance program that we could do every 3 years and exercising these valves so they don't
Yes.
break? And
That's exactly right. It's a valve exercising program. There are standards that are industry standards, and our goal would be to get that as a programmatic approach that our in-house staff, either our in-house staff or a combination of in-house staff and contracting services, will allow us over a determined period of time exercise those valves so that they do not get to the point where they haven't been touched in 20 years.
Okay.
So that is part of that program.
Great. Okay. Second question, last question is on the lead pipe replacement. Those are city supply lines and residential property lines, right? Is that what we're talking about?
So essentially the lead service line extends from the pipe in the street, the city main in the street, to the house. And so that's what we consider as we look at replacing the entire lead service line. Now, a portion of that is owned by the city and a portion of that is owned by the homeowner. And generally the break point is if you have a meter, it's right around that meter pit, or it's at the shutoff stop. So if you take, for example, if you're in your yard, that's the homeowner's responsibility. If you're in the street, that's the city's responsibility. What we're trying to do with this infrastructure money, as well as the WIFIA money, is to be able to remove as much of that burden off the homeowner as possible to essentially eliminate the lead service line. Our goal is to eliminate the lead service lines and get as much federal funding as we can and apply it to minimize that effect on each individual homeowner. We're not exactly sure how that's going to work out yet because we're waiting to see what the restrictions on the federal infrastructure money are, but that is our goal.
Okay. And then, so we wouldn't have service lines, actual large service lines running up and down the street that are lead.
No, those aren't lead. It's the individual service lines. So
Yeah.
going to a business or a residential home.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Member Nudenkamp.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. My question is also on the lead service line replacement. I see that it's 21 million for over the course of 5 years. Do you anticipate that being the full cost of replacing all of the lines? Will that mean in 2027 that project is done? And is this the city's share of the cost, and then in addition to what you think you could get from the federal government?
So I think actually the answer to all those is no. Essentially, our upper end of the estimate is 80 million. And however, the first step is figuring out where we have them. Right now, we don't have a complete inventory of where we have them. So the way we estimated 80 million was by year of installation. And so when we look at it, and so that's a real high level, 30,000 foot level of trying to estimate how many lead service lines we could potentially have out there. We have, in the infrastructure money, we have put in our request at $70 million to support lead service line replacement. We also have in the WIFIA funding, in the water loan, we have 19 million, which would account for 50% of that total cost. So about 40 million to support that. So between those two, we think we'll be accessing enough federal funds to address that. How that shakes out over the next couple years is really what we're working on now. The 21 million is largely tied to WIFIA because that's the piece that we know we're getting funding for. As we move into where the infrastructure money comes from, these numbers will change.
Great, super helpful. And then my next question is also on City Ditch. It's a similar question. I see you mentioned moving it forward, which I appreciate, but the ending in 2026, do you anticipate that project being completed by then? And then is the 500,000 for 2023 just the planning phase?
Yeah, so we actually, the way those numbers changed is they went from, in 2023 it's 1 million, in 2024 it's 6 million, in 2025 it's 4 million, in 2026 it's 1 million. So the bulk of that work, the 10 million, will occur in 24 and 25, and on the front end and the back end will be, you can see the estimate came down because we think the 16.5 was too high of an estimate, and the 1 million at the front end is because we're in the design phase right now. As we get the total design figured out conceptually, then we'll have a better answer on 24, 25, and 26, and we'll make adjustments to those numbers. The goal is to have that project complete and running fully piped city ditch water in 2025.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Mayor Pro Tem.
First question is in regards to dredging. So we have the pond at Allen.
That's correct.
And that's what we're dredging and hauling.
That's right.
But we see this expense 1 year and we don't see it in subsequent years.
That's right. The reason why is because it hasn't been done in a long time, and what's happened is it's built up and it's built up and it's built up, and so this year we actually have a dredging project. It's our first time that we have an outside contractor coming in. They have a big dewatering dredging machine. They're gonna clear out as much as possible, and then based on their estimates of how much they can clear out of the pond to return the volume of the water volume back to the pond. Then we've estimated 400,000 for next year because we want to complete it. So essentially what happens is, as part of the water treatment process, there's particulates and solids that come out and they end up settling in those ponds. And then over the course of time, we have a process by which we pull that water out, or we pull those solids out during the summer. What's happened is the rate at which we pull the solids out was not equal to the rate of the solids going in, and so it was filling up more and more and more and more to the point where it's really gotten full. So we have these 2 events this year and next year to essentially get it restored back down to full volume again. And then we'll utilize our in-house system to keep up with it. And what will probably happen is it'll probably build up over time. And I estimate that generally every 5 years or so, we'll probably have to do some kind of a dredging and hauling project.
Okay, that answers my question as to why it's not an annual ongoing expense. Next question is in regards to Old Hamden. When we tear up a street to do a project to replace pipes, does the utility pay to fix the pavement?
We typically will cost share depending on what the driver is. And so in this instance, I'm not exactly sure how the project is split up, but we pay for the pipe and the trench to build the pipe. And then are we putting in a proportionate share of the top side? So in that instance, the top side would be the actual street piece of it. If we were to come in and replace a section of pipe independent of the street, at that point in time, we'd return the street back to functional, back to the usable, what you'd expect of a topside street. So it depends. Sometimes it depends on the driver.
Okay.
So when there's an opportunity, when you strip off what you don't want to do is you don't want to leave 70-year-old pipes underneath a brand new street.
Right.
Because if you've seen lately, we get some line breaks every now and then. We don't want that to happen under a brand new street.
So I'm hearing you say this was already considered as part of the planning of both projects.
That's right. Yeah. So Maria and I or Director DeAndre and I have coordinated on this, and we often do coordinate on this, and generally it's not a hard and fast rule. It's what makes the most sense for the project based on what the project drivers are.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Member Russell.
Thank you. So I just want to remind, and this may be news, and it may not be. When I got on council, there was a sludge pile, and a citizen kept coming, and that's why the sludge pile went away. And so, are they going to be hauling all of the sludge away this year? We need to make certain that we don't keep the stuff here at all. Because there was a possibility of lawsuits. I don't remember how that all went, but we can't leave it.
So I am aware of the history of how it built up over time and it became a large pile. That is not our practice anymore. So we, through the summer, we'll pull out sludge as part of that everyday process, and then it sits in the drying bed. And then what we did this year is we hired a trucking company, and it took 2 days, and we hauled it all off. And so that is the plan. Our plan is that, and with this dredging process, we're going to have a significant amount of solids that are being pulled out of those ponds. They need to dry for a period of time, but the second piece of that work is to haul it all off at that moment. It is not. We will not have sludge piles sitting around for extended periods of time.
And then also, at some point, will we not be using Big Dry Creek water anymore?
We will always be using Big Dry Creek water. It's a matter of what timing. Well, actually, no, that's a good question, because we'll be using it from a water rights perspective, but in terms of where the actual physical water comes from, it gets into the water from Big Dry Creek will actually discharge slightly downstream of our intake, but our intake will be essentially adjacent, and so it'll be coming directly off the Platte River. So from a water rights perspective, yes, we use Big Dry Creek. From an actual physical water perspective, when we do that diversion, the goal is to divert the higher hardness water downstream of that intake.
Okay, and so, I mean, I guess my question is, eventually, will we be able to, will all of the sludge be changed over in that holding pond so that we don't have the problem with radioactive sludge?
Yeah, so that's the issue, and what you're from a radioactivity, it's technologically enhanced, normally occurring radioactive material. It's called T-norm, and so the technologically enhanced piece is we pull it out of the water. So this is if you have have any runoff from any of the clays in the Denver metro area, there's a slight amount of radioactive material just naturally occurring in the clays. So when we actually process that through the water system, and we pull those silts and clays out, there's that amount of naturally occurring radioactivity concentrates to a point where it's called T-norm. That's the part that we regulate and that we pay attention to in sludge. So we get it tested, and if it meets the criteria for regular landfilling, which it typically does because it is such a low amount, we send it to a normal landfill. If for some reason it exceeds those requirements, we'd have to send it to a hazardous waste landfill.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Any other questions from council? Any questions from the boards or commissions? Wanting to challenge Director Van Rye on his knowledge? No? By the way, just because you joked on it, that was 18 minutes for the water,
Ouch.
so.
I'll go faster on the sewer.
Moving on to the sewer fund. Go ahead, Director Van Rye.
Okay, so on the sewer fund, the bulk of the sewer fund is Englewood's funding a South Platte Renew. You can see that the numbers here. Our estimated end balance is $8.8 million. Again, the budgeted uses will forecast a little bit less than $25 million, but our capital requests are $11.4 million. Half of that, within that, is Englewood's half of the capital investment in South Platte Renew. From a sewer fund perspective, you can see what you see on this table is a number of ongoing recurring programs that have been put in place to ensure that we're maintaining the system over time. So the modeling helps us understand how the system functions. This actually helps us as things redevelop, because one of the biggest impacts is if you go from a single story to a 10-story building, there's an impact on the sewer. We want to know ahead of time what that impact is, so if we need to upsize anything or have a facility upsize or have a development upsize, those types of things. That's on a case-by-case basis. But you can see some of the other things are sewer pipe rehab. A lot of our sewer collection system is clay pipe. Works great if you don't disturb it. It's when it gets disturbed that it cracks or you end up with root intrusion. That's to go through and fix those on a recurring basis. Same thing with manhole. Flow monitoring is to help us to calibrate that modeling system to ensure what we have digitally matches what's actually happening in the field. The ops complex is the sewer funds portion of that total project. And then you can see the Hamden improvements. The middle one, which is the big one, the $8.4 million, that's half of the capital budget request for South Platte Renew. So if you double that, that's the capital request for South Platte Renew, which is just under just under 17 million for 2023. So that's it for the sewer fund.
Any questions from council? No questions? Any questions from boards or commissions?
I guess I do have one question. Sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Perhaps your brevity was your enemy here, but that $8.5 million line, can you talk a little bit about what the ratepayers are getting with that $8.5 million?
That's my next line. That's my next 3 slides.
All right. Well, good.
I appreciate the segue. So here we are. So this is the South Platte Renew Capital Fund, and this is the capital plan the 5-year capital plan that was initially developed as part of the master planning process, and we have been iterating these projects over time based on funding availability, based on our rate and fee models, and based on what Littleton and Englewood have agreed as councils as funding for the capital investment. And so you can see a number of these are so like the building infrastructure and repairs, that's like asset management repairs. So there's 27 buildings out there. And so there's an ongoing number of buildings. We have an ongoing number of projects just to repair those buildings as they age. EI&C is electrical integration and controls. In those 27 buildings, there are a lot of processes that have a lot of motor control centers and variable frequency drive motors. Those need to be replaced on a recurring basis, and so we have a schedule through which we go through and we identify and replace those so that they don't get way out of their useful life. The study and pilot testing program, that is the work that we are doing to stay ahead of ultimately Reg 31, which is those are the nutrient regs that come down in the mid 2030s. And that's the pilot and research center work that is underway this year so that we can figure out how to solve that problem for our plant in advance of that problem, as opposed to waiting until 2035 and saying what technology is available. And right now our estimates are with current technology that we would be in about $150 million range of a cost to comply with Reg 31 in the 2030s timeframe. We've talked about some of the voluntary incentive program helps defer that. A number of these things that we've talked over time. That's what that does. That's staying ahead of that. Some of the other ones, operations of machinery and equipment, that's just general ongoing replacement. Vehicles, we have a few vehicles around. The computer hardware is in there. Kempe UV, that's our current project that's underway. That's a $19 million project that completes out in 2023. We're under a compliance deadline on that one for 2023, and we will be in compliance with that. Headworks, we have some near-term work to do in the Headworks building. Ultimately, there's a longer-term Headworks replacement project. I believe that's about 15 years out. That's a $50 million project, so we're doing some work now to extend the life of the project, and then so that we can plan for that building. Headworks is that's the raw sewage as it comes in, and that's pretty rough on pumps and on equipment. So that's eventually that's going to need some more work. Ops complex, that's underway. That's an expansion of our current administrative facility, as well as working on that administration building, and then expanding our process maintenance capabilities in that area, and also giving us a new control center. Our operations control center is significantly out of date, and so that will give us a new control center. And then some of the other process things like dewatering asset. That's how we spin the water out of the solids and then create the solids that we send out to the farms. Our denitrification, that's just investment in that's in our methanol system. The methanol system is what we inject to add a carbon source, which helps in our nutrient removal process. And then SCT, there's just some work on those on the SCTs, which is the if you've been out there, that's the one where you see all the bubbles coming up through the brown water. That's an aeration system that helps with one of our processes. So you can see all that totals in 2023 of 16.9. Split that in half, and that's where you get the 8.475.
Any questions, Mayor Pro Tem?
One of the things that is least expensive on here is the one that's most exciting to me, which is the study and pilot test program. Is that as inexpensive as it is at $107,000 because we get some partnerships with other educational or private sector groups on the studies and test piloting stuff that we're doing?
Yeah, so you can see how we phase this out. So there's another big investment in 2025, and so we're doing this in a phased approach. So the first step is what we're going to build right now, which we think the estimates on this construction for the first stage of this is about 1.2 million. That gets us off the ground and running to where a technology provider could connect to at least 3 of the liquid streams that are 3 of the most important liquid streams to connect to help us innovate the process for nutrient removal. The next step would be to see how well that's working, see where there might be other demands throughout the plant site, and then invest in a few years in another location where maybe we don't know if there's going to be a desire because of all the emerging PFAS regulations to do more work on the solids piece. We're in a work with the Department of Energy on some work on the biogas system to help improve our gas recovery even beyond just the methane. And so right now what we want to get this first step in place right now, which is what we're building this year. Then a couple years of running it to see where we potentially need more investment. And then there'd be another investment in 2025 based on where the demand and where we think the appropriate place to further invest in our research so that ultimately we can address those longer term challenges.
Thank you.
Member Woodward.
Thank you. My question is the same as Steve's or similar. I was wondering, with that, starting this early for a reg that goes into effect in the 2030s, as you said, I believe, are there vendor grants or vendors that would partner in doing this and testing out some of the equipment and that sort of thing? Any of that available?
That is the philosophy behind Pilot and Research Center. The philosophy is that we get a number of ongoing working relationships with universities where these types of technologies are being evaluated. We actually just got a presentation on algae as a treatment process. We had a PhD student from Mines who just completed her PhD work on site to look at how algae might be used as a nutrient removal process. Will ultimately be looking, and that's in the infancy stage of something that over the next 5 to 10 years could be an answer. Ultimately, through the university partnerships and then finding the right vendors who want to work with us, who want to test out their technologies, we want to have a place where it's easy to come in and test out the technologies. On one hand, because it innovates the wastewater technology for the industry. On the other hand, they're using our site. So we'll end up with the solution that works on our site. The unique thing about wastewater is it's general in technology, but a lot of times site-specific circumstances will drive changes in those technologies. And so as we're helping to advance the emergence globally, if we're doing it on our site, we know that we'll be advancing a technology that specifically works for us. That's the theory behind it.
That's good. I'm happy to hear that. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Any questions from our boards or commissions? Seeing none, Director Van Rye, I believe that's it.
That's it for me. Thank you.
That's it for you. Thank you, Director Van Rye and Director Loh. I think you're going to be wrapping us up now.
Record time, Director Van Rye, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The last page, we're just summarizing the projects by fund. All the beginning balances are estimates, and the tier 1 project costs are estimates at this moment. So just want to have a summary sheet for your reference, and then we'll conclude the presentation for tonight. Yeah.
So any questions from council? So Director Loh, is there anything else that you need from us tonight?
Just thank you for all these good questions. I hope you hear the questions from other boards, commissions, committees, and you raise good questions for staff to consider. So when we present our recommendation along with the recommendation from other boards, commissions, committees, it will be very clear. Hopefully, our recommendations will be very similar. Our priorities are aligned.
Thank you, Director Loh. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. We will pass on a number of these questions that you asked to the boards and commissions if it's in their area of recommendations. But there were 2 items that we got, at least that I got, that were actually more directive in nature. One was please move $300,000 in Tier 2 sidewalk gap construction to Tier 1, or consider that. Try to do that. And then the second one was consider additional furniture in Civic Center common areas. Did we miss any specific directives, or were the rest of those just more questions?
I wouldn't say necessary directive, but just the comment about fiber.
Okay. Right. Yep. Got that one too. Thank you.
Anything else? So Director Loh, thank you very much for the presentation tonight. Thanks to the boards and commissions for coming and listening to the presentation tonight. First time we've done this, so I hope that this was helpful. Obviously, any feedback about how this went would be very helpful for next year's budget cycle, but I appreciate you guys making it tonight and providing any type of feedback. So thank you, everyone. All right, everyone. I think we'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the reason why this is a special meeting. This is the approval of the emergency ordinance on second reading for WIFIA. So I'll just invite Deputy Director Sarah Stone up to just discuss the second reading of WIFIA and any additional or updates to the interest rate, which I'm sure will come up as part of the question. So,
Sure. I'm
Deputy
happy to.
Director.
Thank you. Thank you very much for hearing this again tonight. So I do have an update. The interest rates today were at 2.89%, down a little bit from last week where I hit a max of 2.99% last Wednesday. The other update I have is that WIFIA came back on Friday and let us know that our loan document and approvals went through their process and they are ready to close tomorrow. So we will be closing tomorrow. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Director. Member Russell.
Thank you. So it sounds like it's very possible we will close lower than our original 2.5 or 95%. So that will be great. Thank you.
Director Van Ride, did you want to add?
I just wanted to add one point of one clarification on this. So this is for the sewer fund only loan. Our water fund, we are still in the process of working through some issues with historic preservation. An update on that is we have worked at the EPA at the national level and the historic preservation at the national level think that they may have figured out a way for us to at least close the loan before interest rates continue to rise. We're hopeful that that will occur within the next 30 days. But right now we're somewhat at the mercy of getting through that historical clearance that was frankly not anticipated by either the EPA or us as part of this process. I just wanted to provide that update.
Thank you, Director Van Rye. Mayor Pro Tem.
So this item is specific to sewer. And the interest rate has gone down. But we're talking about an ordinance that we passed in order to increase the maximum cap. Is this actually needed to pass second reading right now because of the rate status?
Well, right now we're at 2.89 and the cap is at 2.95. So without this, if for some reason overnight the rate goes to 2.97, we can no longer close the loan. So I would say that this is, while we're well under the 4.5 cap, which is great, we are still so close to the original cap that this should be passed in order for us to not risk losing that opportunity.
Okay, that clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Any other questions? Member Woodward.
I just wanted to go ahead and move Council Bill number 26 for second reading.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Could I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Noonenkamp. Any additional comments? Seeing none, can we please vote?
Member Noonenkamp?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Ward?
Aye.
Member Wink?
Aye.
Member Woodward?
Aye.
Mayor Sierra?
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 member being absent is Member Anderson.
Thank you, Director and Deputy Director. Moving on to agenda item 9, reports for boards and commissions. Anybody want to kick us off or anybody? Member Noonenkamp.
Yes, I've skipped this last week due to the late hour, but the Public Library Board did meet the week prior, and we had a great meeting. They reviewed the library action plan, they reviewed the library, the commission's budget, or the board's budget, excuse me, and they were also introduced to the new library manager, whose name is Beth something, and she's lovely, from Henderson, Nevada. Okay. And I apologize, I did not write that down, but she is ready to go. She actually came and met with the board before her official start date and had tons of great ideas about what we can do. And I thought specifically was really encouraging that a lot of the challenges that the library has experienced around security and some of those items over the last few years, she is very acquainted with, very comfortable with, has a ton of experience, and I think will be a really great manager for that citizen service. So very excited for that.
Thank you, Member Noonenkamp. Anyone else? I skipped out on the ETAC meeting that happened about 2 weeks ago, so I'll provide an update on that next week. If no other comments, we'll move on to agenda item 10, council members' choice. I went ahead and put an item on here. And I did this before knowing that member Anderson was going to be out tonight. I do want to discuss where we are with the organized garbage and recycling collective initiative, but since it is such a big issue, I would like everyone to weigh in on this. I'm not sure if anyone wants to discuss it tonight or just wait until next week when member Anderson comes in, but any comments there in terms of either weighing in tonight or, because I could weigh in tonight if you like, but would like to have a full council in place to discuss it. So anybody disagree with that? Looks like we're on an agreement. No one seems to want to jump in. Mayor Pro Tem, did you want to say anything?
I agree with that, that plan to defer until we have the full body present.
All right. Anyone in a disagreement? We'll just add it as an agenda item under mayor's choice for next Monday's meeting as well. Council members' choice, I'll kick it off and then I'll ask anyone else. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up was just how the meeting went last Monday. Basically, I wasn't happy with the way the meeting went. I blame myself for not controlling the meeting in a better manner, and I feel bad that there were members of the public that may in the future decide not to come to public comment or to a public hearing for fear of just not being heard during those meetings. So one of the things that I was wanting council to take up was the fact that our council policy actually doesn't state that some of the things that occurred on Monday night are not allowed. And some of the things were just cheering, clapping while other members were talking. Some of these things I believe need to be part of the council policy for us to enforce. So again, I blame myself for not controlling the meeting and not being proactive prior to public comment as well as prior to public hearing. I'll do better in the future, but I do want council to agree to make a change to the council policy in order for this not to happen into the future. So any comments, Member Russell?
Thank you. The one thing that I think this council needs to be very careful of, and we've done this in the past, is limiting people's freedom of expression is wrong. And someone not here sending an email into council complaining about that. I mean, I understand part of the situation that went on that was rude, and you addressed that, and I appreciate that. But somebody that hasn't been here in a long time complaining about that, about people's freedom of expression, I think this council would be walking on dangerous ground to limit that. Councils in the past have done that. And I think what it is a it's a movement for us to silence what the majority feels. And so I'm just warning everyone that we better be careful about that.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Nooncamp.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for bringing this up. I feel similarly with the discomfort about how last week's meeting went, and was also looking in our policies in real time, wondering if we had any way to enforce different behavior. But I have been a staff member in other government bodies and entities in the past, and do believe that there are some best practices around, no cheering or booing or clapping or some of those things that not only can be disruptive to the meeting and actually infringe on someone's ability to express themselves to an elected body, which is something that we should be preserving, but also can create either an intimidating or even a negative experience for someone that would maybe discourage them from coming in the future if they felt like they were part of the minority, or would potentially, I think, skew some of the interaction for council as well. So I do support just having some very basic set standards for decorum within the chamber, or when we're discussing an item within an official meeting, that I do think is appropriate. And I think that there's lots of different best practices that we can lean on for that.
Thank you, Member Noonencamp. Member Wink.
Thank you. I do disagree, and but I understand Member Russell's point. Just looking at Jurassic Parliament, so this has come up in many sessions I've attended thus far at CML's annual conference as well as NLC, and there is a way to establish rules of conduct and not violate protections under the First Amendment. And there's language here. I'll read one quick example. It shall be unlawful for the person in the audience at a council meeting to do any of the following: one, engage in disorderly, disruptive, disturbing, delaying, or boisterous conduct, such as but not limited to hand clapping, stomping of feet, whistling, making noise, usage of profane language or obscene gestures, yelling, or similar demonstrations, which substantially interrupts, delays, or disturbs the peace and good order of the proceedings. Now, none of that prohibits a member of our constituency to come up and share their views and opinions. We're all free to do so. It's a matter of the prohibition of someone coming and being able to peacefully share their opinion because of this distracting behavior. And so I do agree with you, Mayor. I think we should do that. I'm glad to see the profane language and obscene gestures is a part of this. It's simply out of order to create that kind of unsupportive distraction. Please sign up for your time, speak your piece, but be decent. Allow other people to do the same as well. Thanks.
Thank
Can
you,
I
Member
ask-
Wink. Member Russell.
I just have a question. Councilmember Wink, would you read the very beginning of that? It's not even the first sentence about who it is that applies to. Does it say the word constituent? I'm just asking what it said, what you just read, just the first part of it. Not all the stuff that was.
The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution provides protection to and opportunity for free speech in public forums. The public meeting of a board or council is considered a limited public forum, which means the government can regulate time, place, and manner of speech. Boards and councils regulate speech through the adoption of rules of procedure and conduct, which is what we're discussing here.
Okay, and
this is written by someone who.
Right, I'm just asking because I heard you say something, and I just wanted to hear what it was. I don't disagree.
For city
I don't
councils. Yeah, it's very helpful. I've heard the author speak, so I went right to her website because I knew she
Right.
referenced it. It's really helpful.
I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Woodward.
I just want to verify that last week we had a consideration of giving public comment if they were going to speak about the subject of trash, single hauler, giving those people 5 minutes during the public hearing as opposed to the 3 minutes that I think has been standard for us. And I had a comment that I would not consider the public comment prior to the public hearing regarding regarding trash haulers. And I would ask legal advice from the attorney on that. Am I correct in doing that? I believe I am.
Go ahead, City Attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. There are two different types of public hearings. Of course, there's a quasi-judicial public hearing in which we should only consider what's in the public hearing, what's presented during the public hearing. This is an administrative public hearing, and the rules are just a little bit looser. We had requested and voiced a preference that those speaking regarding the subject matter only do so in the public hearing, because then that's part of the record. So let's say 10 years from now, if we went to go back and see what people said, the record, what you pull up, would only be what was said during the public hearing. So everything that was said during public comment is not attached to the matter, so it doesn't become part of the permanent record for that public hearing. So I think because it wasn't quasi judicial, you had discretion whether to consider it or not. You're not making an administrative decision. You're not acting as a judge, or you're not making, I'm sorry, a quasi judicial decision. You weren't acting as a judge. So you had discretion as to what to consider. You could have considered comments that somebody made to you in the hallway coming in. I mean, you're probably still receiving comment from people, either for or against. And there's nothing in our rules that prohibit what information you choose to receive and consider.
Okay, may I ask one other question? That I guess either it could be a council request or you may have the answer right now. If this council decided, okay, let's bring this to a vote of the public, can we, within the structure of the question, state it in such a way that council would have the ability in the future to administrate cost, services, those types of things without a vote of the public again?
So there are some matters that require a public vote, such as if we're going to raise taxes, we have to go get public approval to do that. A single hauler organized trash is not one of those issues that requires a public vote. So then it's up to council. A, do you want to put it on the ballot? And if so, then you have two options. Do you want it to just be an advisory election where you say, for example, the voters of the city of Inglewood, would you support an organized trash hauler even if it means your bill may go up? Something like that. I mean, and please, nobody quote me on this is the language of a ballot question, because this is on the fly. It's nothing that's been carefully worded. So you could phrase it as an advisory question. Second, you could phrase it as a binding question. Shall the city of Inglewood enter into a contract on these terms? But it would be up to you, because it's not required by law that we put this on the ballot.
No, I understand that. But we were hearing a lot of requests for putting it on the ballot. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. And by the way, I believe there was a council request to that same question by Member Noonicamp a couple of months back. So there was a response to it. So just back to the comment regarding just updating the council policy to reflect that. Anyone else from council that is not in agreement? Mayor Pro Tem.
This is kind of challenging for me because I would like us to have meetings that have a sense of decorum. I would like the members of the public to show respect for the public body, for their fellow members of the public, and for the work that's being done in council chambers. I also feel like I have a duty to protect the First Amendment rights of those same people. So in as much as we are going to look at adopting a policy, and Member Wink suggested some language that's probably been fully vetted, but I want to make sure that we don't adopt a policy that runs the risk of resulting in some type of litigation for restraining someone's free speech. Can they bring a sign, for instance? Can they, do this or that? Can they raise their hands or clap or what have you? We need to address all of those things and ensure that we're getting the work of the body done, but we're also protecting the First Amendment rights of the people who come to the meetings.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Woodward. Oh. Okay. City Attorney.
Yes, I'd like to weigh in on that, just for some additional considerations for council. First, no one has a First Amendment right to speak during your public meeting. Whether you allow public comment is up to you, but the law does not require you to allow public comment at all during your meetings because this is your meeting. Would I recommend that we prohibit signage for or against an item? I would not, because it doesn't disturb the meeting. Can we prohibit someone from talking without being recognized by the chair? We most certainly can, because this is your meeting to conduct city business, and no one has a right to come in and commandeer that meeting. But once you do allow public comment, or once you schedule a public hearing, then we are required, and in fact, we encourage people to come and speak. And in that case, then once we do decide we are going to allow it, which we don't have to do, but once we do that, then we can implement the council policies and the rules to maintain decorum, to contribute to the efficient conduct of business so that you can obtain the information you need. And after the last meeting, I actually started drafting some proposed revisions to the council policies, such that my concern would be that other speakers don't attempt to intimidate or coerce the speaker in front of you, because you want to elicit from people their position and their comments, and you don't want anyone to discourage them from giving those comments to you. So I do already have a red line version that I've had going. There are a couple other issues that I think we could address in our council policies a little bit better. I don't want to make it too long, but every time I see something that can be done better, I add to it. So I already have a red line, and I'll work with the mayor. The mayor would like to get that in a form that he's happy with, and that we could then propose to the entire council.
Thank you, City Attorney. Any comments? I was going to add something just because it came up with Member Woodward. Just you happened to mention that there were other things that you wanted to add to it. Was it the fact that quasi judicial versus a administrative? Just understanding if we want to limit during public hearing, public comment, that aspect of it kind of came to mind last week, obviously because we discussed it. Is that one of the items that was also on your list?
What I have in my working document, which I called it proposed 2023 revisions, but it can be 2022, was that if you have a public hearing scheduled, then you will not take public comment on the same subject matter. I also updated a little bit regarding proclamations. The proclamation policy was new, so it's not really clear when council approves the slate of proclamations for the next year what the procedure is for then just putting it on the agenda. So some clarification for that. And then I had written in order to ensure meeting attendees or speakers are not intimidated, marginalized, or otherwise coerced by other meeting attendees, no person shall boo, clap, yell, speak off mic, or speak in response to or during a speaker's comments without being recognized by the presiding officer. So they would have the opportunity to speak, but they have to be recognized by whoever's presiding, mayor, mayor pro tem, whoever it may be.
Thank you, City Attorney. Anything else from council regarding that? I'll just add one other thing about it, was that I do intend to be a little bit more proactive on this for a public hearing. I may have said something, but I said it way too late last week. And I apologize to anyone that was impacted by that decision. Obviously, I want these meetings to be a place where people come and speak to council about, what we're deciding that night or what we're discussing that night. So I'll do a better job in the future, but I do plan on making my comments much earlier in the evening so the meetings don't evolve into what they evolved last night, or last week. Nothing else for me tonight. Anybody else want to add anything for council members' choice?
I just wanted to add a little bit to the conversation
Sure,
because I don't
go
think
ahead.
we've fully closed the loop yet. Regarding restricting what someone can or can't say during the public comment section, the 5-minute scheduled public comment when we have a public hearing scheduled, that strikes me as a much more profound infringement on free speech and something potentially that could be an issue, because we're not specifically telling them whether they can or can't speak, which you've already indicated we can do, but now we're telling them what they can or cannot say. And that seems like a much brighter line than just whether or not they can talk.
City Attorney?
Yes, we certainly don't want to regulate viewpoint. we don't, it doesn't matter to us what side of a position they want to take. That's perfectly within their rights. If we open it up and give them an opportunity to speak, we can't tell them what their viewpoint has to be. But we can place time, place, and manner restrictions on, as long as it's uniformly applicable and limited in scope. So I do think we legally can limit, if they want to speak on a matter that's a public hearing, we can limit it to the public hearing, because that way we do have the record of everything that was spoken. So that would be the subject matter, but not the viewpoint. Because the subject matter, we have a specific place for that on the agenda.
Okay, that clarifies it for me. Thank you.
Anything else from council? Member Russell?
I just have a couple things for council members' choice. One of them is I did get a question from a citizen over the weekend, and I emailed this to the city attorney regarding special meetings. And in the charter under 1-5-22, the person that contacted me thought that a special meeting could not include more than one item for which the meeting was called. Since COVID, City Council has been labeling meetings that used to be study sessions as special meetings so that City Council can vote on certain items. I'm wondering if this is problematic or not. Would you please take a look at this to see if we are in violation of the charter? And I will be happy to bring it up this evening. And actually, I got a great answer from the city attorney. And so I just wanted to give her an opportunity to share, because I think the information you shared with me would help us also.
Certainly. By municipal code, City Council has 2 regular meetings per month, and the first and third Mondays of the month at 7 p.m., or unless otherwise designated by City Council. And we can also hold more regular meetings than that. In order to establish an additional regular meeting, it would have to be designated by City Council. So at a prior City Council meeting, we could designate, for example, at last week's City Council meeting, we could have taken action to designate tonight as a regular meeting. Instead, there's a second procedure. You can designate a meeting as a special meeting, in which case it just requires the mayor to so designate or to agree to do that, which usually we discuss that in the agenda meeting on Wednesday mornings, any meeting related issues. In that case, if we designate what's otherwise a study session as a special meeting, the mayor can either provide notice of that meeting verbally, or we can provide a written notice to the other members of the City Council. It's been our practice when we're just converting a study session to a special meeting that we do it verbally and notify City Council, and then City Council is provided the agenda in writing by 5 p.m. the Thursday before the meeting. So they do receive it both in writing and verbally. When a meeting is designated as a special meeting, we are limited to conducting city business or transacting business to the items that are on the special meeting agenda. So it's not limited to a single item. For example, if the notice in the agenda has 5 items for action, we are limited to those 5 items. So we can't add additional items for city action. So let's say we show up to a special meeting and we realize there's one other issue we need to vote on. We can't do it if it wasn't in the notice provided at least 24 hours prior to the meeting. Now, if we designated this as a regular meeting, we could amend the agenda, we could add items. So there's a little bit more flexibility, but it's more restrictive in how we are able to designate it procedurally, because it requires the entire council to designate it, because it's not in our code as a previously designated regular meeting. Was that too fast? I caught myself talking very fast there for a minute.
No, I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Member Russell. Mayor Pro Tem, did you want to?
Yeah, just one element of that discussion that's very important to me, and I don't know if it's important to anyone else, but the statutory citation that you quoted the citizen as giving was 1-5-2-2, which is a portion of the Englewood Municipal Code, not a charter provision. And there's in my opinion, a huge difference between what the charter requires and what the Englewood Municipal Code requires, and that council can pass an ordinance to change the municipal code, but any change to the charter has to go to the voters.
But wasn't that in the charter? I mean, because it was under the charter piece of it.
Charter does speak to meetings, but not to this specific matter. And I think it's Charter Section 27, but it's always dangerous when I say that off the top of my head. So
That's correct.
Is it correct? Okay. Of course it's correct. I'm not surprised. So clearly you have that in front of you.
I do.
So Charter Section 27, which I now have in front of me as well, it states that regular meetings shall be held at least twice per month, but that City Council also may designate additional regular or special meetings. But then Council shall adopt an ordinance regarding the rules of that. And so Council did that when it then adopted municipal code.
Okay, thank you. It did answer my question. I do have two other things. There was a constituent that emailed me, and I have not talked to this person, but I just wanted to bring this up to City Council to see if at some point this might be something that we are interested in. He owns a pretty big section of land between Jason Park and between Rotolo Park. And I believe he said in the email that it's on the market, and was wondering about if the city might be interested in that in part of a trail situation. So I just for future reference, I mean, I'll call him and talk to him. If he's got it listed, it may have already sold, but I just wanted to know if that might be something that council might be interested in the future, if there were big portions of land, especially parkland.
Is this a residential area or, I mean, residential land? Or?
I don't know what it's zoned as because I don't know exactly where it is, but it is several acres. He has a residence. I don't know if that property is for sale on Oxford, just above Jason Park. So I don't know if the city ditch runs in there for sure or not. I could find out more, but this is just a general question, whether it's that piece or maybe at some point in the future that's something that council wanted to look at. I think we need to maybe talk about that ahead of time before something becomes available. So I brought that up for consideration.
Thank you, Member Russell. Actually, I do have questions about it, but City Manager Lewis.
Mayor, thank you, and Member Russell, thank you for bringing this up. I do think this is something that we would like to get pretty clear direction before staff researches, but we're certainly willing to look at what the land is, if there is some connection, benefits, trail opportunities, etc. But I appreciate Member Russell bringing it up because we would definitely like clear direction on whether or not to look into that.
Yeah, thank you, City Manager Lewis. The very first thing that popped to mind was just kind of like when we were talking earlier about Duncan Park and how you said the school sold it back to us in 2006 or whatever it was. So what is our policy when there is like property that is available in the city? Like what's the precedence that we had in the past? Yeah, because this is new to me. It's like I'm not sure how many people just come and say, hey, does the city want to buy this land? I obviously want to evaluate every type of opportunity for the city. So I would be open to looking into it, but just understanding the policy behind it. But anyone else want to weigh? Oh, Member Woodward.
Yeah. Let's see. With regard to going back to meetings again, the third type of meeting.
Oh, wait. Hold on, Member Woodward. If we could just answer Member
I'm
Russell's.
sorry. Okay. With regard to the land issue, the real estate, I know what we've done in the past is if we identify or it's publicly identified, usually we get the information on what if it's listed or whatever and meet in executive session to decide on a real estate matter, whether we want to make an offer, that sort of thing, or suggest something. Now, that's speaking of what we did with Duncan Park specifically, and what I'm sure you've all done and we did with leases for McClellan properties and that sort of thing. So
Anyone else want to weigh in on Member Russell and having staff take a look? Anyone? Member Wink.
Thanks. Can we have staff take a look and then we can talk about it further when
Yep.
we have a little bit more
Thank you, Member
information?
Wink.
I think it'll be great.
Member Noonenkamp.
Yeah, I'm open to just understanding the general
Yeah.
policy and strategy behind acquisition of property for the city. Maybe not this one specifically, but generally, and then we can go from there.
Okay. I think that's at least majority. And Member Russell, the floor is still yours.
And I agree with that. I just wanted to put that out there. Then one other, and this is probably a council request. It has come to my attention that we're experiencing water problems at Broken T Golf Course, and the problem has been going on for a while. So, can we get some information on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Woodward, you're next.
Okay, I wanted to go back to the third type of meeting being an emergency meeting. Is that limited to one item?
Would you
Go
like
ahead,
me to
City Attorney.
We were just talking about not speaking without being recognized. So we only have two types of meetings, which is regular or special. So generally, an emergency meeting I would expect to be a special meeting because you can call it with 24 hours notice by designation of the mayor. And generally, then that would be limited to whatever business is within the written notice for something like that. There are other special things we can do in the case of an emergency. For example, we can adopt an emergency ordinance, which still requires 2 readings, but they can be two days in a row versus
Correct.
7 days in between.
And, okay, so a special meeting for an emergency ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
We used to call it an emergency meeting, which
Just the abbreviated
over the years we had
reference
a
to
number
it.
of them.
Mm-hmm. But yes, technically it is a special meeting.
Okay, thank you. And that's just one item, right? Just that specific item, or
It's not limited to one item. It's limited to however many items are in the notice of the meeting.
okay.
So if the notice of the meeting contains 5 separate items to be voted on, then you can vote on those 5 items.
Even if they aren't an emergency.
Yes, exactly.
And in 2 days for a second reading?
No, only the emergency items qualify for the emergency ordinance
Okay.
treatment.
Okay. Second item, I did attend with the city manager also the planting by the 5th graders from Bishop Elementary of xeriscape type plants at Depot Park with Dana and I've forgotten her last name. But I had the opportunity to speak to the 5th graders, and I explained to them a little bit about our strategic plan and sustainability in the strategic plan, and how in the future, directly related to that project of last year, we will probably be seeing more of this in our parks. And that was part of our sustainability project or one of the projects for this coming year. So it was a lot of fun. And 5th graders have a lot of energy. Not quite as much as 3rd graders, but a lot. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Anyone else tonight? City Manager's choice.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick note that we will be bringing back an amended proposal for the CIP to you based on your feedback, but we really would encourage you to continue to look at the list, talk to constituents, and find out what things you might like to see moved up, or some things that need to be moved off, because as you saw on the list, we need to remove 8.9 million from the just the CIP, the capital the two main capital project funds that their name is escaping me. And then lastly, just a reminder that we were awarded the Metro Vision Award for the homeless Tri-Cities Homelessness Policy Committee. That awards event is going to be Wednesday evening. And so thank you for all of you who have RSVP'd, but I hope you'll join me in taking pride in that award. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager Lewis. With that, we are now adjourned. Everyone have a good evening. We'll see you guys on Monday.